Hello, welcome to the Fanfic Majesty. If you want more content, you can follow me on Patreon. I will be uploading more content on there that will be exclusive. The link is in the description. Please support me. 6TD. Chapter 35. A God versus a Demon. Gonfall and the remaining of Luffy's crew were currently staring up into the thunder cloud-infested sky where Luffy disappeared into. Gonfall had a bewildered look on his face because he had never seen anything like this before. I have never seen the heavens this angry before, he said in a whisper loud enough for everyone to hear him. It's not the heavens, Sanji replied before he lit a new cigarette. It's just our captain who is angry, Nami said. All of them were still standing around Robin and Chopper, who was still treating Robin's wounds. What should we do now, Nami? Usopp asked as he turned his attention to their navigator. Nami thought about it for a while before she gave him her response. For now, we need to get the ship away from the upper yard, she said. Just as she said that, a bolt of lightning came down from the sky and struck the sacrificial altar, destroying it completely. Chunks from the destroyed altar were blown everywhere, with some of them even heading in the direction of the ship. Sanji, Usopp, and Gonfall immediately sprang into action to defend the ship, with Sanji kicking away some of the debris from hitting the ship, Usopp using his slingshot to shoot some of them out of the air, and Gonfall using his javelin to stop a few of them. Nami's right, Sanji said as he kicked another giant rock away. We need to get out of here. Heaven knows how much of his power Luffy is going to release, he said, causing everyone to nod their heads in agreement. Chopper, you should take Robin inside, Nami said as he looked over to the little reindeer who was treating Robin's wounds. Aye, Chopper replied before he transformed into his heavy point and picked Robin up bridal style and carried her inside. Sanji then walked over to the anchor and pulled it up from the cloud sea while Nami and Usopp untied the sails. We are going to have to use the crow to push us because there is no wind around here, Usopp said before he walked over to the side and hopped onto the crow. He rigged the small boat that Caunus loaned to them to the back the Going Merry before turning on the dials, causing the small ship to act as a propeller for the Going Merry. The crew then began sailing out of the upper yard the same they came in. On their way out, they were all startled when someone landed on the main deck. Thinking that it is an enemy, they all quickly turned their attention to the spot where they heard the land with all their weapons drawn. However, they all relaxed when they saw that it was only Nojiko who was standing in the center of the main deck with her 3-section stall around her neck. You all weren't planning on leaving me, here were you? Nojiko asked with a smile. Where is the rest of the guys? She asked as she looked around and did not see Luffy, Zoro, Robin, or Chopper. That Enel guy attacked Robin. Chopper is treating her inside. Zoro hasn't returned yet and Luffy went to kill Enel, Nami explained. Is Robin all right? Nojiko asked with a worried look on her face. She has some burns, but look to be good for the most part, Nami replied, causing her sister to nod her head while getting out a sigh of relief at the same time. Nojiko then looked up at the sky before she chuckled. I take it Luffy is beyond angry, she said. That's putting it lightly, Nami, Sanji, and Usopp replied simultaneously. The Merry then began its journey to exit the upper yard with the help of Gonfall directing them. With Zoro. Zoro was currently standing inside of a dome made of barbed wire-like clouds along with 5 Shandorians, one of Enel's priests, 4 weird goat guys who work for Enel, a giant dog, and a giant snake. It had been a strange fight, to say the least. Every time Zoro was making headway against the priest, he was either attacked by one of the Shandorians or by the dog. The only reason he is not heavily wounded is because of his observation haki. To be fair, he was not exactly taking things all that seriously. After all, he only had 2 of his swords drawn and he had not used his armament haki yet. Currently, all the fighting had ceased due to that sky turning black with thunder and lightning flashing across the sky. You all should just give up, the priest said as he rests his sword against his shoulder. There is no escaping Almighty Enel's prophecy. And it seems as though he has grown impatient with all of you and is ready to bestow his divine judgment. The priest said, causing Zoro to chuckle. I don't know about your god, but it looks like my captain is very pissed off, Zoro said, getting everyone's attention. Your captain, just like the rest of you Blue Sea dwellers, he is weak, The priest began before he was abruptly cut off by a bolt of black lightning coming down the sky, breaking through the dome cage as if it was made of paper and striking him down. When the bolt of lightning dissipated, everyone there was shocked to see the priest lying flat on his back with Luffy standing above him with his right foot on the priest's head, pressing it down into the ground. I'm going to ask a question one time and one time only, and if you want to live you are going to answer me, Luffy said with a murderous look on his face as he stared down at the priest who was beneath his foot. Where is Enel? He asked. He increased pressure on the priest's head. His foot was covering the man's mouth so the priest couldn't even answer him. Not going to answer, huh? Well, that's too bad, Luffy said before he increased the pressure on the man's head, exponentially crushing it like a grape under his boot. The onlooker had their eyes widen in shock at what they just witnessed. That man was one of Enel's priests, one of the strongest warriors in all the upper yard, and yet he was killed so easily. How dare you? The goat guys dressed in white robes yelled before they all rushed at Luffy, trying to take him from behind. Luffy, however, did not move a single muscle. He just stood there. Take this, they yelled as all of them pointed an open palm at Luffy. Axe dial. They all yelled as they activated their dials, sending 4 pressurized wind blades at Luffy, who just stared at his 4 attackers with a bored expression on his face. The wind blades sliced right through Luffy, cutting his torso into 3 pieces and separating his neck from his body. What happened next surprised everyone there except Zoro. Luffy's body just turned into lightning and placed itself back together again as if nothing had happened to begin with. A Logia user, whispered the leader of the Shandorians. That was a big mistake, Luffy, before he raised his right hand and pointed an open palm at his 4 attackers as electric blue lightning surrounds his palm. L. Thor, Luffy said lowly. As he said that, a giant cylindrical beam about 10 feet wide shot out from his hand and engulfed the 4 attackers, incinerating them along with everything that was behind them. When the beam disappeared and Luffy lowered his hand, the 4 men were nowhere to be seen, nor was any of the ruins that were behind them. Is everything all right, Captain? Zoro asked while looking at his captain. God paid Robin a visit, Luffy said in a cold, emotionless voice. Is she all right? Zoro asked. She's fine. She is with Chopper now, Luffy replied as he looked around. I think he is up there, Zoro said while pointing at the giant beanstalk. Luffy looked over at the beanstalk, which seems to go all the way up to the heavens, which is saying something considering that they were already pretty high up, to begin with. Well then, by all means, let us bring Almighty God down from his golden throne, Luffy said with anger ever so present in his voice. He then walked to the edge of the dome where the beanstalk is. He held his right hand in front of him before clenching his fist, causing pitch black lightning to surround his body. Second gear, he said, causing the black lightning around the body to intensify along with the thunder and lightning flashing in the sky. Luffy then pointed his index and middle finger just away from the giant beanstalk before he spoke again. Heaven's sword, he said in a menacing voice as he slashed his 2 fingers horizontally across the air, leaving a small trail of black lightning following his fingertips. 2 seconds after the slash was complete, the deafening sound of a thunderclap shook the entire island, and at the same time, the giant beanstalk was cut into 2. He just cut Giant Jack down with his finger, one of the Shandorians whispered in awe and fear. What is he? Another asked. Even Zoro was somewhat surprised by this. He had thought that there was nothing Luffy could do to surprise him anymore, but he was wrong. The man just sliced a giant beanstalk with a finger, not a sword but his finger. The other thing that surprised Zoro was the black lightning. He had never seen Luffy used such an ability before. It made him realize that there were a lot of things about his captain's power that they did not know about. The beanstalk, which was apparently named Giant Jack, began to fall towards the west of the island. Angel Island. Everyone, look, a Skypian yelled out while pointing in the direction of the upper yard. Giant Jack is falling. The man yelled out, causing everyone to look to see the giant beanstalk tilting more and more with every passing second. What is going on over there? Asked the leader of the White Berets. First the heavens turned black and now Giant Jack is falling. Just what is Enel doing over there? He asked. Is this all because of those blue sea dwellers? A person asked in fear. Do you think it is them who did this? Another asked in fear. People, please be at ease, yelled out the captain of the White Berets, trying to calm the public down. We of the White Berets shall protect you, he said. On the Going Merry, the Straw Hats had dropped anchor some distance off the island. The crew was extremely lucky to run into Connis and her father, who had come to the upper yard in hopes of guiding the Straw Hats to their escape. They used a series of dials to help the Straw Hats take a shortcut out of the upper yard and to safety. Father, look, Connis said while pointing to Giant Jack. Giant Jack is falling, she said as she stared at the falling beanstalk. Oh my, you're right, said Pagaya as he too stared up at the falling beanstalk. Just what could have cut a tree as mighty of Giant Jack down? Asked Gonfall. Luffy, replied the Straw Hats casually. With Luffy. As the beanstalk was falling, Luffy spread his arms out wide and spoke while looking up to the heavens. What's the matter, God? He shouted out, knowing very well that Enel was on an island cloud just above them. Afraid to show your face? He mockingly asked, trying to get under the so-called god's skin. I guess you're not so much of a god after all if you too scared to face me, a lowly human. Luffy said with a mocking chuckle. Just as he uttered those words, a bolt of electric blue lightning struck down 20 feet behind him, revealing a man standing there holding a staff made of gold. How dare you speak to me, a god, in such a manner? The man, who was clearly Enel, said with a cold look on his face. You should be on your knees begging me to show you mercy, he added arrogantly, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow at him. Luffy was not exactly paying attention to anything he was saying. He was instead more focused on the so-called god's appearance. He was a pale-skinned man with a well-toned yet somewhat wiry build. Very distinctly, Enel's earlobes stretch all the way to his chest, being weighed down by gold earrings with diamond-shaped pendants. Upon his back, stuck centrally into his shoulder blades, is a large, gray ring, and attached to it 4 wooden Shime Daiko drums set next to and above his head, each with cream-colored drum skin depicting a black Mitsudomo on the front and back. Luffy had to admit, he had seen some strange people in his time on the Grand Lin, but this sure takes the cake. Apparently, while Luffy was focusing on the man's appearance, Enel had continued talking. When Luffy realized this, he shook his head clear before speaking. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Could you repeat all of that? He asked with a slight smirk, knowing very well he was pissing the god off. You scoundrel, Enel yelled before he pointed his staff at Luffy. Sango, he bellowed, releasing a massive charge of electricity from his hand which traveled through the golden staff before blasting out of the staff in the direction of Luffy, who just stood there and did nothing. The blast engulfed his entire upper body and lasted for 3 seconds. When it disappeared, it revealed the entire top half of Luffy's body gone along with it, leaving only his lower half still standing there. Enel smirked in satisfaction for a few seconds before his smirk disappeared when particles of lightning from all over began gathering around Luffy's missing upper body, rebuilding it. The process did not take more than a second before his entire body was back to normal, as if nothing happened to begin with. Were you not paying attention? Luffy asked with a bored expression on his face. I am lightning itself. Your attacks mean nothing to me, he said with a smirk before he wiped the smirk off his own face and spoke in a chilling tone. You are either a Paramecia type user or a Zone type user. Either way, he said before he disappeared and then reappearing in front of Enel with his fist buried in his gut, causing the god to cough up some blood before blasting off into some of the ruins due to the force behind the punches. You have a physical form, Luffy said emotionlessly as he watched the god break through multiple ruins before coming to a stop 40 feet away. He just sent Enel flying like it was nothing, said a Shandorian warrior wielding 2 pistols. This is unreal, said another as they stared between Luffy and the downed Enel in awe. Hey, Blue Sea Dweller, yelled a Shandorian, who was obviously the leader. Enel is mine to kill, and right now you're in my way, he said as he began walking towards Luffy. Luffy said, looking over to the warrior walking towards him. You are that gorilla that attacked my crew down on the White Sea, he noted as he stared at the man. You couldn't even handle my crew and you think you got what it takes to fight me? Luffy asked as he raised an eyebrow. What arrogance, he stated coldly. This is none of you Blue Sea monkeys' business, the warrior said. Stop meddling in the affairs of our people. The man yelled as he continued to walk towards Luffy. I could care less about you and your people, Luffy said coldly, causing the warriors to growl before acting the dials on his shoes and charged after Luffy. Wiper no. The other Shandorian warriors yelled. Luffy just looked on as the warrior named Wiper got closer and closer to him. Wiper then leapt up, aiming both of his legs to kick Luffy in the chest. Fool! Luffy thought as he stared at the oncoming attack. When Wiper's shoes impacted Luffy's chest, everyone was surprised to see that it hit Luffy and did not phase through him as they all had expected. Even Luffy was surprised by this. Sea Prism Stone, he thought to himself as he realized what was going on. Luffy then suddenly dropped to hose back, feeling incredibly weak. Wiper did not let up, he quickly planted both feet on Luffy's chest and stood there, causing Luffy to lose a lot of strength to fight. Being from the Blue Sea world, I am sure you are familiar with the mineral known as Sea Prism Stone, Wiper said cockily. Is that it? Luffy asked weakly while staring up at the warrior, causing him to growl. Sure. Sea Prism Stones weaken Devil Fruit users, however, it does not take their powers away, he said before suddenly grabbing the legs of the Shandorian, surprising him. It just makes us feel incredibly weak, which in turn causes us to not be able to control our powers, he said, enlightening the Shandorian. But when you have the power of lightning like I do, who needs control? He said before he released a great surge of electricity from his body with no desirable target. Because he was holding onto Wiper's legs when the discharge occurred, the Shandorian warrior was electrocuted him, causing his eyes to roll back into his head and him to fall over unconscious. Luffy then got up and dusted himself off and looked in the direction of where he sent Enel off to. Wiper is down, said one of the Shandorians. What should we do? Another asked. I would advise you take your leader and leave here, Zoro suddenly said to them. If the captain is going to cut loose, you don't want to be around here when it happens, he said, warning the Shandorians. Not even a second later, they all grabbed their leader and ran. They had seen Enel's power firsthand and that was frightening, but Luffy's power was on an entirely different level from his. How dare you do this me, you insufferable little brat? Growled Enel as he began to pick himself up. I am a god, he yelled out before wiping some blood from the side of his mouth. I've had just enough of you, he said before lightning surrounds his body and he grew a few feet in height. His appearance changed slightly as well. His hair grew slightly and stood up straight as if it were defying gravity, his muscles became more defined, and his face became fiercer. Allow me to give you a glimpse into the godly power of my human fruit, model Amaru. He said arrogantly with a smirk on his face while spinning his golden staff. Arrogant as ever, Luffy said with a sigh as he shook his head before he turned to Zoro. Get out of here, Zoro, he said, causing his vice captain to nod his head before running and jumping off the island cloud that they were on. Luffy then held up his right hand and surrounded his palm with lightning before adding armament Haki to the lightning, causing his to turn into black lightning. Second gear, he said before clenching his fist and absorbing the black lightning into his body. Not even a second after doing that, sparks of black lightning appeared all around his body. You made a big mistake messing with a member of my crew, Luffy said coldly as he narrowed his eyes. Now you are going to die a slow and painful death, he said in a chilling tone before he kicked off the ground and dashed forward towards the god at top speed, destroying the ground he once stood on in the process. Even though Enel knew what attack Luffy was going to do thanks to him knowing observation Haki, he could not block the attack in time. Luffy appeared in front of him at speeds faster than lightning itself and delivered an uppercut to the false god, sending him airborne at the speed of lightning. Luffy then bent his knees slightly and looked up with narrowed eyes at the so-called god ascending into the thundercloud-infested sky. He then kicked off from the ground, traveled straight up, breaking the sound barrier on the process. Enel, who regained some of his senses, looked down and saw Luffy flying towards him at blinding speed. He gritted his teeth before he tapped two of the drums on his back with his golden staff, causing them to glow electric blue before he pointed his staff at the incoming Luffy and yelled out, God's judgment. He bellowed out as lightning traveled from his hands through the staff and a large beam of lightning shot out of the tip of his staff, heading directly to Luffy. With Luffy being in the air, Enel had expected that he had no way to dodge the oncoming attack. Luffy just smirked as the beam of lightning got closer and closer. He then turned his body into a bolt of black lightning just as Enel's beam of blue lightning impacted him. Enel smirked victoriously when he saw that his attack hit its target, but the smirk vanished from his face when he saw his previously blue beam of lightning began turning black from the bottom up. When the entire beam of lightning turned completely black, the beam disappeared, revealing Luffy floating directly in front of Enel. "Thanks for the ride," Luffy said coldly, causing Enel's eyes to widen in horror. Luffy caught a glint in the corner of his eyes of something shining off to their left. Deciding to investigate it, he did the only thing he could do in a situation like this. He covered his fist in lightning-infused hockey punched Enel in the direction of the glint that the saw. "Gingnir," Luffy said as he punched the false god in the face. As his fist impacted the Enel's face, a loud thunderclap was heard throughout Skypiea. Enel once again blasted off in the direction of the glint that Luffy saw, breaking the sound barrier in the process. As Luffy would Enel fly towards the island cloud that he saw the glint on, he turned his body into a bolt of black lightning and shot up into the thunder clouds, using the electricity particles inside of them to travel faster. When Enel was directly above the island cloud, a bolt of black lightning came out of the struck him right in the chest, sending him barreling down towards the cloud. As soon as he impacted the cloud, his body bounced back up about 3 feet off the surface of the cloud. It was then Luffy appeared once more and slammed his foot into Enel's stomach, stomping him back down into the cloud, causing him to cough up a large amount of blood. In the process of coughing up all that blood, Enel's body shifted back to his original state and all the lightning around him faded away. "Would you look at that?" Luffy said as he looked off to his right at the giant golden bell that was sitting on the cloud. "That must be the bell that Nolan talked about in his journal," he noted as he admired the bell. He also took note of the poneglyph that was attached to the base of the bell. "Robin is going to want to see that," he thought as he stared at the poneglyph. "That is mine," Enel growled out weakly, getting Luffy's attention. "It will be a great addition to the Arc Maxim," he said in a weak voice, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him. "What the hell is an Arc Maxim?" Luffy asked while staring at the god. "It is the ship I've been building for the past 6 years. Cough asterisk cough," he replied in a hoarse voice. "After I kill you, I am going to destroy this sky island and send it back to the blue sea word before taking that bell and sailing on to Endless Verth," he said, causing Luffy to look at him as though he was crazy. "I got news for you, God," Luffy said as he bent down and whispered into Enel's ears. "You are going to live past the next 10 minutes, he said in a chilling tone, sending shivers down Enel's spine. I can't die," Enel said as he stared at Luffy with wide eyes. "I am a god," he said, causing Luffy to shake his head. "For the last time," Luffy said coldly as he raised his leg off Enel only to slam it back down into his midsection, causing him to cough up more blood. "You are not a god," Luffy yelled out as he stomped on Enel some more, causing him to let go of the golden staff he had. Luffy eyed the golden staff a bit before picking it up and twirling it around in his hand and spinning it around his body. "I never did see myself as a swordsman," he said as he places his other hand on the sword strapped his side. "But this staff feels right in my hand," he said before looked back at Enel. "I think I'll keep it," he said with a chuckle. Luffy then summoned his thundercloud that had all his stuff inside of it. The cloud came up beside Luffy and hovered there in place before something began rising from inside the cloud. It was a big fruit basket containing a variety of fruits. Luffy then looked back at Enel and spoke with a smirk on his face. "You have such a rare devil fruit," he said with a smile while looking at Enel. "You mind if I take it, would you?" he asked in a chilling voice, causing the beaten god's eyes to widen in horror. Luffy then laughed coldly before looking at Enel and speaking in a menacing tone. "Well, you don't really have a choice in the matter," he said, causing the already pale man to go even paler. Luffy then turned Enel over onto his stomach before grabbing both God's arms and pulling them back towards him. "Wait. No, stop," Enel begged as he began feeling the pain of his arms about to break. "Have mercy. Please," he begged Luffy, whose eyes just took on a cold, emotionless look before he spoke in an emotionless tone. "Did you show my crew member mercy when you electrocuted her?" he said menacingly before shaping both of Enel's arms back, causing the sickening sound of Enel's shoulders popping out of its socket to be heard. Ah! Enel screamed out in pain. Luffy then let go of his arms before walking over to his legs. He then covered his right foot in haki before stomping on Enel's left foot, breaking it. Did you even think of showing her mercy? Luffy asked before he walked around to the other foot. Or was she just an insect for you to crush under your boot? He asked before breaking the left foot in the same manner, or the right. Ah! Enel continued to scream loudly. Luffy then turned him back over, placed the bottom of his newly owned golden staff on Enel's chest. This is going to hurt. A lot, Luffy said in a cold tone before black lightning traveled from his hand through the golden staff and into Enel's body. As soon as the black lightning entered his body, Enel let out a blood-curdling scream which echoed throughout Skypiea. The people of the sky were already frightened when they saw the heavens turned black and when Giant Jack fell, but that scream scared them even more than anything else. Hurts, doesn't it? Luffy asked with a sadistic smirk on his face. No. Please. No more. Enel begged, but Luffy paid him no mind. That is 1,000 volts. Let's try 10,000, Luffy said. He increased the voltage. 100,000, he said, once again increasing the voltage. 1 million. He said. He pushed it even further. Enel opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Luffy stopped after 10 seconds and stared down at Enel, who was foaming at the mouth. Luffy then placed the golden staff on the thunder cloud with the fruit basket before walking towards the giant golden bell. He stopped once he was about halfway there and looked back at Enel, who was currently unconscious. Why don't you help me ring this bell? Luffy said before he pointed his open palm at the fallen god, causing a bolt of black lightning to fire out and wrap itself around Enel's neck. Luffy then grabbed a hold of the rope made of lightning before he started to swing Enel's body around like a windmill. With every cycle that Enel went around, Luffy increased the speed at which he was spinning him until finally Luffy made a step forward and slammed into the giant bell with such force that it knocked the bell back and off the island cloud, causing it to fall down towards the upper yard. As Enel impacted the bell, Luffy increased the temperature of the bolt of lightning that wrapped around his neck to such a degree where it sliced right through Enel's neck, decapitating him. Enel's head rolled on the surface of the island cloud while his body went over the side of the cloud with the bell. Luffy then quickly turned and looked at the fruit basket and a red apple turning electric blue before swirl patterns appeared on it. When Luffy saw that, he smirked victoriously. Luffy walked over the Enel's head and picked it up by his hair before walking back to the thundercloud. He was about to hop onto the cloud but stopped when the sounds of the bell ringing filled his ears, causing him to smile. He then picked up his staff and the newly made devil fruit before hopping onto the cloud and flying off to the location of the golden bell. He arrived almost at the edge of the upper yard where Bell had landed. When he got there, he saw that it was still swinging back and forth, playing its sweet song for all to hear. He then turned his attention to the poneglyph and closed his eyes as if he were trying to hear something. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes and smiled. A weapon, huh? He said with a chuckle before hopping back on the cloud and head in the direction where he sensed Zoro being. After picking up a lost Zoro, the two of them made their way to the ship, which was currently sailing towards the upper yard along with multiple other ships that had both Skypians and Shandorians. The thundercloud stopped just in front of all the ships, causing all of them to stop as well. Luffy walked forward with his golden staff in one hand, the Enel's head in the next. Guess he wasn't that much of a god, Luffy said as he held up Enel's head for all to see. He then tossed the head into the white sea before hopping onto the Going Merry. He killed Enel, a Shandorian said in awe as he stared at the sinking head. Unbelievable, he killed God, a random Skypian said, causing Luffy to sigh and shake his head before looking around his ship. He saw that there were more people on board his ship than he had left. There was his crew along with Gonfall, Kanis and her father, a little Shandorian girl, and those Shandorians and their leader that was fighting with Zoro. Before he could say anything to all of them, Gonfall stepped forward and spoke. You have killed Enel and freed the people of the sky from his tyrannical rule, he said in a voice filled with gratitude. How can we ever repay you, young man? He asked while looking at Luffy. Luffy looked around and saw that the other Skypians were all nodding their heads in approval of what Gonfall was doing along with a few Shandorians. Well, I am kind of hungry, Luffy said as he rubbed his belly. And we would appreciate some of the gold that Enel stole, he added, causing his crew to smile, especially Nami. That can be done, Gonfall said with a smile. We Sky people have no uses for gold really, a lot of us don't even know what it is, he said, causing Luffy to nod in understanding. Hey, Straw Hat! Yelled out someone, getting Luffy's attention. When Luffy looked over to the side of his ship, he saw the leader of the Shandorians who he electrocuted sitting against the main mast of his ship. How dare you ring the golden bell? Only a Shandorian may ring it. He yelled, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes before a loud thunderclap sounded overhead, frightening some people. I suggest you check your attitude while you are on my ship before I finish what I started earlier, Luffy said coldly, causing Wiper to growl. As for why I rang the bell, I got a friend who was a descendant of this guy named Nolan, so I rang it for him, he added with a shrug, causing the chief of the Shandorians' eyes to widen along with Wiper's. Luffy paid them no mind. Instead, he walked up to the upper deck where Nami was and spoke to her. What is it, Captain? She asked. Has the log pose reset? He asked while looking at her. Nami looked at the log pose on her wrist before she replied. No, not yet, she said, causing him to smile. Well then, let that vacation we were all expecting when we got her to begin, he said before he walked into his captain's quarter, leaving his crew smiling behind him. Luffy. He heard the voice of Robin yelled out, stopping him as he was about to enter his quarters. When he turned around, he saw Robin, who had bandages all over her body, looking up at him, causing him to smile knowing what she was about to ask. The Golden Bell is located at the southwestern part of the island, he said before she could speak. I was previously on an island to the west of Giant Jack, but I knocked out off of there when I kill Enel, he said, causing her to smile along with every other Skypian. He then walked into his quarters and closed the door behind him. Luffy sat down on his bed and braced his golden staff against the wall before he reached under the bed and pulled out a chest. He then reached into his coat and pulled out a key before unlocking the chest and opening it, revealing a chat filled with devil fruits. Thanks for the fruit, Enel, he thought with a chuckle before closing the chest and sliding it back under his bed. Chapter 36. Hell's Company and the Return to the Blue Sea. Luffy was currently standing on the rear deck with a glass of whiskey in his hand. One day had passed since he killed Enel. The Straw Hats, Shandorians, and the Skypians had thrown a large feast in celebration of Enel's defeat. The previous evening was filled with loud singing, dancing, and a whole lot of drinking. A lot of the participants of the party were currently still sleeping, while some of them were already awake and exploring the upper yard for the first time. As for the Straw Hats, most of them were awake, with the only ones who were still asleep was Usopp and Chopper. Sanji was in the kitchen with Nami and Robin making breakfast, Zoro was off to the side of the Going Merry training, and Nojiko sitting on the main deck with Kanis and her father talking. After eating a delicious breakfast that Sanji prepared, the crew and the now awakened Skypians and Shandorians all decided to go exploring the island in their own way. Usopp went to a group of Skypians and Shandorians and began trying to trade them all sorts of items from the Blue Sea world for the dials found here on a Sky Island. Nami, Nojiko, and Chopper went off to search for gold along with Kanis, Pagaya, and a few Skypians. Zoro went off to continue his training alone, and Sanji went off to find some cooks from Skypia to exchange some recipe with. With everyone gone their own separate ways, only Luffy and Robin remained on board the ship. The two of them were currently standing on the main deck, look off into the giant forest. Shall we go see this bell? Luffy asked as he looked over at Robin, casing her to smile before she nodded. The two of them then hopped off the Going Merry and began walking through the forest in the direction of where the bell was. The two of them walked for about 20 minutes before arriving at the location of the giant bell, only find that there was a large crowd of people there, both Shandorians and Skypians. At the head of the crowd was Gonfall and the chief of the Shandorians. They were all staring at the poneglyph attached to the bell. Chief, what does it say? A Shandorian warrior asked as Luffy and Robin made their way through the crowd. It is an ancient text, the chief replied as he stared at the poneglyph. It is impossible to read, he added in an apologetic voice. As soon as he uttered those words, Robin spoke up and began reading the words etched into the stone. "We shall know the true meaning and utter it to no one," Robin said as she and Luffy walked out of the crowd and made their way to the poneglyph. The chief's eyes widened in shock as he heard what Robin was saying. "It is our legacy to be the inheritors of history and our duty to protect it with the sounding of the Grand Belfry," Robin continued while Luffy just smiled. "Those words," the chief said in a shocked voice. "How do you know them?" the chief asked as he stared at Robin. "Those words were described on a wall in one of the ruins of Shandora," she replied as she and Luffy stopped in front of the poneglyph. "Long ago, your people were entrusted to be its guardian, correct?" she asked as she continued to stare at the giant stone. "You can actually read those texts?" the chief asked, but he got no reply. Luffy stared up at the giant poneglyph as he began to hear a small voice inside of his head. "It talks about one of the ancient weapons, doesn't it?" Luffy suddenly asked, taking Robin and everyone else by surprise. "Ancient weapon?" a Shandorian asked in surprise. "Why would it have that on there?" another asked. "You can read what it says?" Robin asked as she turned her attention to her captain. "Not exactly," Luffy replied as he took off his straw hat and ran his hand through his hair. "More like I heard it tell me what was on there," he said, confusing everyone who was there. "It's hard to explain. All I know is that it talks about a great weapon," he said with a sigh. "It talks about the ancient weapon Poseidon, a weapon named after a god," Robin said as she read through the poneglyph. "It even tells its location," she said. "I already know where Poseidon is," Luffy said, surprising her once more. "You could even say I've seen it already," he added casually, causing her eyes to widen in shock. "Hey look," a Shandorian warrior said while pointing off to the side of the poneglyph. "There is some more stuff engraved on the side," he said, causing everyone to look over. "Gall. D. Roger," Robin whispered out in surprise, getting Luffy's attention. The two of them walked over to the side and cleared some of the vines that were around it before Robin began reading what the writing said. "I have come here and will lead this passage to the farthest ends of the world," she recited in a surprised voice. What did the Pirate King mean by that, and how could he write the ancient text? Robin asked herself. "He couldn't write it," Luffy suddenly said as he places his hat back on his head. "He had someone on his crew who could," he added, causing Robin's eyes to widen. "Who?" Robin asked as she stood up and stared at Luffy with hopeful eyes of finding someone else like her who could read the ancient text. "A man named Kazuki Oden," he said, surprising her. "He's dead now, but he was the one who wrote that statement," he said as he stared at her before he started chuckling. "Don't worry," he said as he patted her head. "When we get to the New World, I'll take you to Wano country. The land where the poneglyphs was made," he said, causing her eyes to widen to the size of dinner plates. "The land where poneglyphs are made," Robin said in an astonished voice, causing Luffy to chuckle at her reaction. She looked like a kid who just heard that they are going to be taking a tour of the place where they make all the chocolate in the world. Before anyone could say anything else, Nojiko came running out of the forest looking for Luffy. "Luffy!" she yelled out, getting everyone's attention. "What is it?" Luffy asked in a serious voice. "Is something wrong?" he asked, slightly worried that something happened to one of them. "No, nothing like that," Nojiko replied as she tried to catch her breath. "We found Enel's ship," she said, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow at her, wondering why the hell a ship was so important. "It's made of gold," he added, causing his eyes to widen. "This I got to see," he said before he turned to Robin. "You going to be okay here?" he asked, to which she nodded. He then walked off towards Nojiko while at the same time summoning his thundercloud. When the cloud arrived, the two of them hopped onto it and flew off in the direction where Nojiko and the gang found the ship. They arrived outside of a cave with a curtain with the kanji for God written on it. The duo walked through the curtain and into the cave, where they saw a giant ark with large oars on the side along with propellers. The thing that caught Luffy's attention, however, was the giant face made of gold on the main deck. There were both Shandorians and Skypians there as well, staring up at the behemoth of a ship. "Luffy, look at all that gold," said an overly excited Nami as she ran towards Luffy with Chopper following behind. "Can we take it?" she asked. I don't see why not, Luffy replied before walked out and stood directly in front of the Ark. Is there anyone on the ship? He asked, to which they all shook their heads. Luffy then smiled before his entire right hand was covered in lightning. Thor. Luffy yelled out as he punched his hand forward, causing a giant beam of lightning to fire out and engulf the Ark. Luffy held the beam of lightning there for about 30 seconds before the beam vanished and the Ark along with it. Those looking on had a surprised look on their faces when they saw that the giant ship that was previously there was gone and replaced with 20 square blocks of gold. Each block was about 5 feet wide and 5 feet high. Find some way to get them on the ship and we'll take them with us, Luffy said as he dusted off his hand before walking back towards them. How are we supposed to take all of them back to the ship? Nojiko asked as he looked between the gold and Luffy. Get the Skypians and the Shandorians to help, Luffy said with a shrug. Tell Zoro that it will make him stronger to carry them back, he suggested. Ask Sanji. I'm sure he'll go crazy if the two of you ask him, Luffy said, giving them multiple options on how to deal with the problem of getting the gold to the ship. Has the log reset? He asked his navigator. No, not yet, Nami replied as she glanced down at her log pose. Well then, I'm headed to Angel Beach, Luffy said as he began walking towards the exit of the cave. I didn't come to Sky Island to stay on dry land the entire time. I came here to relax on a cloud, he said as he walked out of the cave. You know where to find me if you need me, he added before he left the cave. He has the right idea, Nami said as she watched Luffy walk out of the cave. One day later, Luffy was currently laying back on a lounge chair made of an extremely soft cloud under a cabana on Angel Beach with a glass of an exquisite tasting wine made on Skypia to his right. The wine was a gift from the people of Skypia when he arrived back on Angel Island yesterday. They were treating him and his crew as if they were royalty. Speaking of his crew, they too made their way to Angel Island late last night with a few dial-powered ships tugging the Mary from the upper yard to Angel Island. Currently, they were all scattered all over the island doing God knows what. Luffy did not mind. They had earned a little vacation and he was not in the mood to get up from the comfy chair he was in. He simply leaned back, took a sip of his wine and began enjoying the peace and quiet. Purapurupuru purapurupuru purapurupuru. Luffy's eyebrow twitched as the sound of his transponder snail ringing. How the hell am I even getting a signal all the way up here? He asked himself in a frustrated voice before he looked over to his left where his trusty Thundercloud was. He reached in and pulled out a small chest where the sound of the ringing was coming from. Luffy opened the rest, reveling it filled with transponder snails before he stuck his hand in an image around trying to find the snail that if ringing. He then pulled out a small transponder snail with an eye patch over its left eye. When Luffy saw the witch snail, he smiled slightly before he answered it. Paul, my old friend, he said into the microphone of the snail. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call? He asked as he closed the chest and took the snail that he was using over to his right and sat it down next to the bottle of wine. Asura, a deep voice sounded out through the snail. I'm just calling to confirm from requests I received recently, the man named Paul said. What kind of requests? Luffy asked before taking a sip of his wine. I received multiple requests from individuals in the 4 Seas and one from here in the Grand Line to build bases, he said, causing Luffy to nod when he heard that. They all claimed that Asura told them to call me. One group here in the Grand Line came to tell me in person even, he added. Names and location, Luffy said in a serious voice. Ms. Valentine in the south. Paul asked. One of mine, Luffy replied. Ms. Merry Christmas in the north. He asked. Mine, Luffy replied. The Bounty Duo in the east. He asked, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow at the codenames that Johnny and Yosaku chose. Mine, Luffy replied. And a woman named Paula came to see me personally a couple of days ago, he said. Yeah, I sent her to you. She is going to be running the Hino branch, Luffy said into the snail. She said she found an uninhabited island to set up base. I want you to check it out and see if it meets our requirements for the plans we have for the head of the Hino branch, Luffy said. Same plan we came up with? Paul asked. Yeah, the very same, Luffy said before finishing his glass of wine and began pouring himself a new glass. Very well. I will contact my people in those oceans and have them begin construction, Paul said, causing Luffy to nod. Hell's Company already has rooted itself in all the world's ocean in such a short amount of time. Don't you think you are moving a bit too fast, Asura? Paul asked in a curious tone. No, I know the Navy are probably already aware of Hell's Company's existence, but they can never truly grasp the true size and magnitude of Hell's reach. By the time they try to do something about it, I would have already sunk my claws so deep into this world that it would be impossible for them to take me out, Luffy said in a serious tone before he finished with a deep chuckle. Nice to know Paradise hasn't mellowed you out, Paul said with a chuckle. How are things in Alabasta? He asked. Things are progressing pretty smoothly here. We finished with the second level of the basement a couple of days ago and are currently working on the first level, which should be done in 3 days. After that, we just need to start building the main floor and the docking ports. I got about 150 people working here, so it should take another 2 weeks to finish everything, Paul said, causing Luffy to smile. That is wonderful news, Luffy said before taking a sip of his drink. Yeah. The princess comes by every couple of days to check how things are going, and I hired a few of the locals to help with construction. I might hire some more to speed things up, but if we continue at this current pace, we will be finished in 2 weeks, Paul said proudly. Luffy smiled when he heard Vivi was checking in regularly. What about the Marines? Luffy suddenly asked. Any trouble? He asked. There was a Marine captain that showed up here with his ship demanding to know what we were building and who we are building it for, but the king got rid of him right before I was about to send him and his ship down to the seafloor, Paul said, causing Luffy chuckle. But other than that, there has been no trouble, he said, causing Luffy to nod. Make sure to give me a call after you inspect the island that Paula found, Luffy said. Will do, boss, Paul replied before the two of them hung up the phone. Luffy then put the transponder snail back into the chest and was about to close it, but as he was closing it he sighed and pulled out a different snail and pushed the button that was on top of it. Purapurupuru 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 kachak. Asura, came the voice of Isaac through the transponder. Isaac, how are things there in the west? Luffy asked with a smirk. Everything is great, business is starting to pick up. Made our first big weapon sale a couple of days ago to a group of rebels fighting a civil war, Isaac said, causing Luffy to smile. Did you try selling to the kingdom they are fighting against as well? Luffy asked. I already sent some people to go talk to the king, Isaac said, causing both him and Luffy to start laughing. We truly are the scum of the earth, Luffy said with a chuckle. We wouldn't be pirates if we were anything else, Isaac replied with a laugh. True. Anything else you have to report? Luffy asked before taking another sip of his wine. Well, a few hospitals here in the West Blue who we spread the word to that the famous Drum Kingdom medicines can only be acquired through has started putting in requests for the medicine. I sent a ship back into the Grand Line to go deliver the requests to the kingdom and bring it back, but I received word that the kingdom only now began medical production again, he said, causing Luffy to nod his head. I'll give the king a call after I'm done talking to you to see what's going on, Luffy said into the snail. Why did you call me anyway? Isaac asked, reminding Luffy of the reason he called one his generals. That's right, I called to tell you to distance yourself from Hell's Company, Luffy said, confusing Isaac. Why? Isaac asked. Because you are already known for sailing under my flag. I don't want people to find out that I am Asura so soon, Luffy said, causing Isaac to understand. Let Jiro be the face of things there in the West Blue while you oversee everything from the shadows, Luffy said. Roger that, Captain, Isaac said. Anything, in particular, you want me to do from the shadows here in the West? He asked in an excited voice, causing Luffy to smirk. I want you to build up my fleet there in the West, Luffy said with a smirk. Bring more pirates under my flag. Promise new up-and-coming rookies and weaklings my protection if they sail under my flag, Luffy said, causing Isaac to chuckle. Tell them that you can guarantee their safety if they ever decide to enter the Grand Line, Isaac said in an excited tone, causing both him and Luffy to chuckle deeply. That's it, Luffy said with a chuckle. I'll get right on that. See you later, boss. Isaac said before he hung up the phone, causing Luffy to shake his head and put the transponder snail back into the chest. Might as well get all of this out of the way now so I can relax, Luffy said before he reached back into the chest and pulled out a larger transponder snail. He dialed a number into it and waited for the other party to pick up. Purapurupuru 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 Kachak. Hello. A man answered politely. Hello, Dalton, how are you? Luffy asked the new king of the Drum Kingdom. Luffy. Dalton asked. The one and only, Luffy replied as he swirled the wine in his glass around. How are things in the kingdom? He asked. Everything has been going great. The people are finally happy, and things seem to be picking up, Dalton replied happily. Also, we renamed the kingdom. It is no longer called the Drum Kingdom, but the Sakura Kingdom now, he informed Luffy, causing him to nod. That is good to know, Luffy replied through the snail. Make sure to let all of my people who come there know to tell their customers, he added. We are already doing that, Dalton said as Luffy began rummage around some papers. We are getting a lot of requests from all over the world for medicines, we can't seem to keep up the orders, Dalton said in an apologetic voice. Don't sweat it, Dalton, Luffy said with a smile. Whatever it is you need, just ask my people and they will get it for you. If you need more workers, I am sure they can find some for you. If you need facilities built, just tell one of my people to send a message to Paula and she will put in touch with my personal architect, Luffy explained, causing the new king to relax slightly. Thanks, Luffy, he said in a grateful voice. You have been a real help to the people of this country, he added. The Sakura Kingdom is one of my territories, it is only right for me to take care of it and its people, Luffy said before taking a sip of his wine. We will forever be grateful to you and your crew, Dalton said through the transponder snail. By the way, how is that little reindeer that you took with you? He asked, causing Luffy to smile. He is just great, Luffy replied with a slight smile. He is a great doctor and one hell of a pirate, he said with a chuckle. I'm sure Drive Kurha will be happy to hear that, Dalton said, causing Luffy to nod his head. Give me a call if you ever need me, Dalton, Luffy said. Will do, Dalton replied before the two of them hung up. Luffy placed the transponder snail back into the chest before staring at the transponder snails in the chest as if trying to decide whether to call someone else. He ultimately decided not to enclose the chest, causing it to sink back into the cloud. That's enough work for one day, he said with a smirk before he poured himself another glass of this exquisite Skypian wine and leaned back in the comfortable lounge chair. 1 week later. An entire week had passed since Luffy spoke to his subordinates in Hell's Company. He was currently standing on the rear deck of the Going Merry wearing a pair of black beach shorts and an unbuttoned red flowered shirt, showing off his necklace with a lightning bolt, his chiseled abs and well-toned muscles, along with the tattoo of the Jolly Roger of the red-haired pirates in the left side of his abdomen. The log pose had finally reset, and the crew was getting ready to set sail. Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper were loading some supplies onto the ship. Nami and Nojiko were talking to Kanis and her father about how they were going to get back down to the Blue Sea. Robin was sitting on the main deck reading a book, and Zoro was standing next to Luffy looking out at the island. A large group of the Skypians had come to see the crew off. They were all waving and cheering at Luffy, who for the most part ignored all of them. Do you know the next island that the log pose is pointing to? Zoro asked, getting Luffy's attention. Not a clue, Luffy replied before he turned and walked over to his throne. It wouldn't be fun knowing where we are going all the time, he added as he sat down. He then looked over to the main deck to see Sanji, Usopp, and Chopper loading the last of the supplies on the ship. Go get Nami and Nojiko, Luffy said to Zoro, causing him to nod his head before he walked to the side of the ship and yelled for them. While he was doing that, Luffy turned and spoke to Sanji. Are we all set, Sanji? He asked. Aye, Captain, Sanji replied as he looked up at Luffy. It was a tight fit considering all the gold that is stored below deck, but we got everything, he said, causing Luffy to nod. All right then, Luffy said as he saw Nami and Nojiko walk onto the ship. Raise the anchor and prepare to set sail for Cloud End, he ordered, causing Chopper to walk over to the front of the ship and pull up the anchor while Usopp and Sanji released the sails. Nojiko made her way to the rudder to take charge of steering while Nami and Zoro moved to stand on either side of Luffy. Kanes and her father will be escorting us to Cloud End, Nami said, causing Luffy to nod his head. Soon the sails of the ship caught a little bit of wind, but thanks to the extra weight on board it was not enough to move the ship. It would appear as though we have a problem, Luffy said as he raised one eyebrow and stared at the sails. Don't worry, Usopp shouted out, getting everyone's attention. Captain Usopp shall save the day, he declared before rummaging around in his bag for a bit before pulling out 2 dials that he got from the people here on Skypiea. He then walked up the upper deck and stood directly behind the main mast and pointed the 2 dials at the sails. He then pushed the button that was on the backs of both dials, causing a gust of wind to blow out of the shells. As soon as the wind hit the sails, the ship jerked forward and began sailing out of the port at Angel Island. So cool, Chopper yelled out with stars in his eyes. Nice one, Usopp, Nami said with a smile. I'm impressed, Luffy said with a smirk. Usopp started to laugh proudly with all the compliments he was getting. As the ship was sailing away, the people of Skypiea waved goodbye and shouted praises to their heroes as they watched them sail away. Off to the side of the Going Merry traveling in a waver were Kanes and her father scoring Luffy and the crew towards Cloud End. The Straw Hats said on the white sea for about 1 hour before the place known as Cloud End came into view. That's Cloud End, Kanes shouted while pointing at the upcoming structure. It was a gate like the one they saw when they entered Skypiea. The only difference was that this one lacked the golden gates and was not as big as the one at the entrance of Skypiea. It did have a beautiful rainbow forming a large arch just above the gate. Kanes and her father increased their speed and got ahead of the Going Merry to dock their waver off to the side at one of the walkways at the gate. As they merry sailed through the gate, the father-daughter duo began running beside the ship shouting their goodbyes. This as far as we can go, Pagaya shouted. Take care, you guys, Kanes yelled as she waved goodbye. Thanks for everything, Nami shouted back as she waved. We'll miss you, Nojiko yelled as they sailed further through the gate. Kanes, don't forget me, Angel, Sanji yelled with hearts in his eyes. Now take care of yourselves and hold on tight, Pagaya shouted to the crew. You're in for a bumpy ride, he said, causing them to nod. The ship then sailed through a tunnel with an obvious downslope at the end of it. The crew all held onto the ship, preparing for just an equally rough ride down as it was getting up here. Hold on and do try not to fall off the ship, Luffy said calmly as he crossed his legs on his throne and sat there without a care in the world. She then said down the slide and began picking up speed. You guys hold on tight. The free fall is about to begin, Kanes shouted just as the Going Merry sailed off the slide and began falling towards the blue sea. Freefall. The Straw Hats all thought to themselves with a horrified look on each of their faces. Even Luffy's eyes widened slightly when the ship began falling from 10,000 meters up. The ship fell about 500 feet in about 10 seconds before a giant octopus shot out from the cloud and wrapped itself around the shop. What the hell? Zoro said as he prepared to cut the octopus, but was stopped when the ship stopped descending so fast and began slowing down dramatically to a point where it was as if it was floating. Well, this is new, Luffy said as he looked up at the giant octopus that acted like a balloon. It's a balloon, Chopper said in amazement as he stared up at the creature. We're not falling, Nami commented. Before anyone else could say something else, the entire Straw Hat crew heard the beautiful sound of the giant golden bell tolling. At this speed, it is probably going to take us a while to get back down to the blue sea, Luffy said as he stood up from his throne. I suggest you all get comfortable, he added before he walked towards his personal quarters. Navy HQ. Currently, inside of the office of the Fleet Admiral of the Navy, there was a small meeting taking place between a few of the high-ranking officers in the Marines. Sitting inside of the rather large room was Vice Admiral Garp, Vice Admiral Suru, and of course, there was the Fleet Admiral himself, Sengoku. It was a regular meeting scheduled to discuss the current affairs in the world. When will this great pirate era end? Sengoku said as he let out a tired sigh from behind his desk. Who says it has an end? Garp asked as he munches on rice crackers. Sooner or later someone will find that treasure, then they will die, and the cycle will start all over again, he added between bites. You just had to go and make my day even worse, didn't you, Garp? Sengoku said. Bahahaha. Garp laughed out. Yes, I did. He added happily, causing the fleet admiral to groan. What are we waiting for anyway? Suru asked as she looked at her two oldest friends bickering with each other. We're waiting for Gion to bring the scouting reports for this week, Sengoku replied as he leaned back in his chair. Just as he finished speaking, there was a knock on the door. Enter, Sengoku said loudly. Soon the doors to the office were pushed open and in walked Marine Captain Gion carrying a clipboard. Good morning, Fleet Admiral, Vice Admiral Suru, and Vice Admiral Garp, Gion said respectfully with a slight bow. This week's scouting reports are in from the scouting division, she said as she handed the clipboard to Sengoku, who looked at the papers on the clipboard before passing some of them to Suru and Garp and some back to Gion. Anything major to report? Suru asked as she looked at the young Marine captain. Nothing too major, Gion said as she looked at the papers. A civil war has broken out in the Black Raven Kingdom in the West Blue, she said, causing the three Marine officers to nod their heads. The world sure is a turbulent place, Garp commented as he read through the report. One conflict after the next, he added before hitting down on a rice cracker. The Drum Kingdom has a new king and has decided to change the name of the kingdom to the Sakura Kingdom, Gion said, causing them to raise an eyebrow. Who is the new king? Suru asked. A man named Dalton, Gion said as she turned her attention to the female vice admiral. He was a former royal guard under the old king, she added. Is the old king dead? Sengoku asked. We don't know, Gion replied in an apologetic tone. We do know that Vice Admiral Garp's grandson, the Thunder Demon, was responsible for the demise of the old king, she said, surprising everyone in the room. The new Sakura Kingdom is now also flying the Thunder Demon's flag around their country, signifying that they are under his protection, she said, causing Garp to choke on his rice cracker. What? The three of them yelled out in surprise. When did this happen and why weren't we informed of it sooner? Sengoku asked. He stood up from behind his desk. Apparently, this had happened long before the Straw Hats had even arrived in Alabasta. We're only finding out about it now because in the past couple of weeks the kingdom has been quite active, Gion explained. Active by doing what exactly? Garp asked as he narrowed his eyes, wondering what kind of trouble his grandson was causing now. It doesn't seem to be anything bad, Gion said, calming everyone down. They have just been ordering a lot of supplies to produce medicine once again, she said, causing them to raise an eyebrow. They are world famous for their doctors and medicine production, Suru noted with a nod. And there hasn't been that much being produced from the old Drum Kingdom in recent years, so this may be a good sign, she said, causing everyone else to nod their heads. So, the Thunder Demon already has 2 countries under his control, Sengoku commented as he sat back down in his chair. That is correct, sir, Gion said with a nod. It was also reported that there was an incident between the Thunder Demon and Bellamy the hyena back on Jaya a week ago, she added, getting all their attention. What was the incident? Sengoku asked as he raised an eyebrow. From what we gathered, Bellamy took one of the members of the Thunder Demon's crew hostage as a way to get back at him for an earlier beating, he explained, causing the 3 officers to nod their heads. What followed next was the complete slaughtering of Bellamy's crew, with Bellamy being the only survivor, she said, causing their eyes to widen slightly. There is a detailed eyewitness report on page 7, she added, causing all of them to turn to page 7 and read through the eyewitness report. There is no way Bellamy is powerful enough to survive Luffy, Garp noted as he read through the report. Oh no, it wasn't that he survived. It was more like your grandson left him alive as punishment, Gion said, causing the 3 of them to understand. Do we know why he was there on Jaya? Suru asked with a curious look on her face. Reports say he was there to gather information on a sky island, she said, surprising everyone in the room. Do we know where he is now? Garp asked. There have been no sightings of the Thunder Demon for the past week, she said, causing the Vice Admiral to chuckle. Guess he found the information he was looking for, Garp said, while the other 2 officers nodded in agreement. While we are talking about the Vice Admiral's grandson, Gion suddenly said, getting all their attention once more. It should be noted that the Angle of Death, Franklin D. Isaac, has been spotted in the West Blue. I only bring it up because it was reported recently that Isaac now sails under the Thunder Demon's flag, she said, causing a puzzled look to appear on all of their faces. Why would a powerful pirate from the New World suddenly go to one of the four blues? Suru asked with a curious expression on her face. We don't know, Gion said with a sigh. All we know is that he was spotted there, she added. Keep an eye on that, Sengoku said seriously. I doubt he is there on his own accord. It more like he was sent there, he noted as he narrowed his eyes. Yes, sir, Gion said as she made a note to tell the scouting division to keep up on this. Anything else to report? Suru asked. What about that organization you told us about last time? Garp suddenly asked, causing the other two officers to remember. Yes, Hell's Company, Gion said as she flipped through a few pages to find the report on it. Some Cipher Pol agents managed to infiltrate their operations in the North Blue, she said, causing a slightly excited look to appear on the faces of the two vice admirals and fleet admiral. However, they were unable to gather any information on who their leader, the mysterious Asura, truly is, she said with a sigh, causing a disappointed look to take the place of the previously excited faces of the occupants of the room. You said the North Blue, what about the other blues and the Grand Line? Suru asked. Agents were not able to join, Gion said, causing everyone to raise an eyebrow. The branches in the other oceans don't seem to be taking in anyone who offers their services. It's more like they scout out who they want to hire and then offer them a job, she said, causing everyone to sigh. Do we know anything new about this organization? Sengoku asked. Well, it seems as though they secured a deal with the new Sakura Kingdom to be the only distributors of their medicines, Gion said, surprising the three older marine officers. There are reports that hospitals from all four blues are placing orders through this organization for the world-renowned medicine from the Sakura Kingdom, she said, causing everyone to nod their heads. That's all well and fine, however, is there any intel on the illegal smuggling done by this organization? Sengoku asked. Only rumors, sir, Gion replied with another sigh. Nothing concrete, she added. Let's hear these rumors then, Garp said as he sat up straight. Gion nodded before she read through the papers for a few seconds before she spoke again. It is rumored that Hell's Company is the one who supplied weapons to the rebels in the Black Raven Kingdom, which kick-started the Civil War, she said before she looked up at the fleet admiral. However, this is yet to be confirmed whether or not it is true, she added, causing them to nod. I don't like this, Sengoku said with a sigh. Neither do I, Suru added as she placed the papers down and folded her arms. It is already known to the government that the underworld is well established in the New World, but was always the thought that their reach didn't extend to paradise, and if it did, it wasn't as elaborate as the New World, she said, causing the two men in the room to nod in agreement. I think we all start preparing to deal with an all-out war, Garp suddenly said, getting everyone's attention. And why the hell should we do that, you old fool, Suru barked out at Garp. There are no signs of a war about to happen, Sengoku said as he stood up from behind his desk. Think about it, Garp said in a serious voice. The underworld is already well established, and the people who run the underworld are all likely very powerful in their own right, he said as he narrowed his eyes. This Asura is new and he is expanding at an extremely fast rate. I don't think people are going to like the fact that he is taking business away from them, Garp said, causing everyone to understand why he suggested they should prepare for war. It will be a war for control over certain parts of the underworld, if not the entire underworld, given the number of pots this Asura has his hand in, Suru said as a thoughtful look appeared on her face. And a war like that is not one that can be contained, Sengoku said with a sigh. We could also use this to our advantage, Suru said, getting everyone's attention. We can use the war to infiltrate the underworld in order to get a better understanding of it, she said. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, Sengoku said as he sat back down. For now, we should just gather more information, he said, causing everyone to nod. Anything else to report, Gion? He asked as he turned his attention to the Marine captain standing in the middle of the room. No, sir, Gion said. Very well. Dismissed, Sengoku said, causing Gion to bow salute before making her way out of the room. Why can't this job ever be easy, he said as he let out a tired sigh and leaned back into his chair. What are you talking about? Garp asked with a large smile on his face. It is easy. Bahahaha. He said loudly, causing Sengoku and Suru to groan. That's because you don't do anything. The two of them yelled. With the straw hats. The sun had already set, and the straw hats were all lounging around on deck, bored out of their minds. Luffy had transformed his throne into a lounge chair and was laying back staring up at the octopus balloon. Even he had to admit that it bores just sitting there waiting for the ship to reach the bottom. I did not think it would take this long, Robin said from her position on the ground. Can't this thing go any faster? Nami asked as she let out a frustrated sigh. Is it just me or does the balloon look smaller? Sanji suddenly asked as he stared up at the octopus. Luffy narrowed his eyes and looked at the octopus before his eyes widened slightly. The balloon is shrinking, he said loudly for everyone to hear before he got up from his throne. I guess it does look smaller than before, Nojiko noted. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? Usopp said in a scared voice. Just as he said that, the octopus balloon deflated some more, causing the ship descent faster. We are going too fast. Nami yelled out as she and everyone else held on to something. Luffy anchored himself down before he spread his arms out wide, causing sparks of lightning to dance around his fingertips. Soon an extremely large thunder cloud came down from the sky faster than the ship was defending and positioned itself directly under the Going Merry. The Going Merry impacted the cloud but continued to defend just as fast as before. Luffy then clenched his tightly and proceeded to take up a lifting motion with his body as though he was trying to lift the ship. Ah! Luffy yelled as he began to feel the weight of the ship. The ship started to slow down, but it was still going too fast. We're slowing down, Chopper said in excitement. But we are still going too fast, Nami said in a panic as she leaned over the side of the ship and stared down. At this rate, we will hit the sea so hard we will sink to the bottom. She yelled. That is if the ship doesn't shatter first, Robin said, causing Usopp's head to shoot up. Not on my watch, Usopp said as he pulled out the grappling hook from his belt and attached it to the side of the ship before jumping off, surprising everyone. Usopp then went under the giant thunder cloud and attached some wind dials onto it. The wind dials activated and slowed the ship down drastically. However, due to the extra weight they were carrying, the speed at which they were defending was still too great. Everyone, hold on to something. Luffy yelled out as he began pushing him further while the crew pulled Usopp back in and braced themselves for an impact. The Going Merry impacted the water hard, destroying the thundercloud Luffy had made while at the same time creating huge waves that splashed over the side of the ship. As the ship impacted the water, sound of stuff breaking on the ship could be heard by everyone, but they were all too caught up in trying to stay alive to really pay attention. The ship rocked back and forth in the now rough water while the crew tried to pick themselves up off the ground. Is everyone all right? Nojiko asked as she held her head and slowly stood up. Yeah, just a bit shook up, Nami replied as she stood up. When everyone got up and looked at Luffy, they all saw him still breathing heavily while kneeling on the ground with sweat dripping from his face. You okay there, Captain? Zoro asked, to which he only received a nod. Luffy then uses the little strength he had left to stand himself up before reaching into his coat and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and took a drink straight from the bottle until it was empty. I'm fine, Luffy said as he tossed the bottle aside. Usopp, Chopper, you two check below deck for damage to the ship, he ordered in a tired voice. Aye, Captain. Usopp yelled back with a salute. You can count on us, Chopper said while in his little reindeer form. Nami, Luffy said, getting her attention. Take us to the next island, he said, causing her to nod. Luffy then walked back to his throne and plopped himself down on his throne. I really need to get a ship that could fly, he said with a sigh as he landed on his throne and closed his eyes. Chapter 37. The Admiral. The crew had been sailing for about 3 days now since they arrived back on the Blue Sea. Luffy was currently standing in the front of the ship wearing a black slim-fit dress suit pants with a pair of pretty expensive-looking dress shoes which looked to be made from some kind of animal skin which allowed it to shine in the sunlight. He also had on a black form-fitting silk button-up shirt with the 2 buttons undone, exposing his lightning bolt necklace, and hanging from his shoulders was his captain's coat billowing in the wind. The most notable difference about Luffy was the fact that he did not have his sword strapped to his waist like he normally does, but instead he had a golden staff in his right hand which he got from Enel. The crew was currently scattered all over the ship doing their own thing. Sanji was in the kitchen preparing lunch, Robin was in the kitchen with him, but she was reading a book. Usopp was on the rear deck sitting on the floor with his tools and some dials trying to incorporate them into Nami's Klimatak. Chopper was sitting not that far from Usopp making medicine to restock his supply. Zoro was also on the rear deck with the two of them, but he was training by swinging around a large weight. Nami was sitting on the main deck on a lawn chair reading a newspaper while Nojiko was up in the crow's nest keeping a lookout. Land who? Nojiko yelled up from the crow's nest while holding up a pair of binoculars. Her voice got the attention of everyone on board the ship, who all stopped what they were doing to come and see the island. It's still pretty far away, Luffy said as he leaned against his staff. I can barely see it, he added as some of the crew joined him at the front of the ship. There seems to be fog surrounding it, Nojiko said, causing her sister to worry slightly. Chopper. Go man the rudder just in case we come across trouble, Nami said to the little reindeer, causing him to transform into his heavy point and run off to the rudder. It's still pretty far and it will take us a while to get there with this wind, Luffy said as he turned and looked at the sails. The Going Merry sailed forward slowly for about 2.5 hours before they arrived at the edge of the fog surrounding the island. As they sailed through the fog, the entire crew was slightly on edge due to a strange ship they came across earlier that had no sails or flag and only had 5 people on board. When the Merry finally made it through the fog and arrived at the island, there was nothing but grass and trees as far as the eye can see. It seems to be uninhabited, Robin commented as she looked out at the island. It's nothing but grass and trees as far as the eye can see, Luffy noted as he stared out at the beautiful sight. It's like a blank slate, completely untouched by man, he added. What are we standing around for? Usopp asked as he got up onto the side of the ship. Let's go, he yelled before leaping off the ship with Chopper following behind him. Hey, don't just jump off like that, Nami scolded, but the duo paid no attention to her. They have no sense of danger, she said with a sigh as she shook her head. You worry too much, Ms. Navigator, Robin said before she hopped off. Luffy just chuckled before he too hopped off the Merry. When Luffy landed on the island, his attention was immediately drawn to his right, where he saw a white bear walking upright, but the only difference was this bear was extremely long. What the hell? Luffy asked himself as he stared at the bear walk across the meadow. Hey, Luffy, Usopp yelled while holding up a red fruit with a bite taken out of it. Check out how long this apple is, he said, surprising his captain. What a strange place, Luffy commented before he walked forward to one of the trees and used a small bolt of lightning to knock an apple off the long trees. Chopper, Usopp, and Nojiko went off in the distance to examine a house they saw, leaving Luffy, Nami, Zoro, Sanji, and Robin behind. Luffy just knocked a few apples off the tree again before sitting down at the base of the tree eating them while staring at the strange animals that were on this island. This is truly a bizarre place, Nami commented as Sanji hopped off the Merry followed by Zoro. How long are we going to stay here, Captain? Nami asked as she walked towards Luffy. Don't know, Luffy replied calmly as he continued to eat the long apples. We'll figure it out, he added with a chuckle, causing Nami to growl. Captain, we have company, Robin suddenly said, causing Luffy to look over at her. When he looked over, he saw a large galleon sailing up behind the Merry with a large Jolly Roger on its mast. The ship stopped directly behind the Merry and shot off 2 large claws which acted as anchors, allowing it to completely box the Merry in. Seems like they are looking for a fight, Zoro said as he places his hands on his swords. We are the notorious Foxy Pirates. Someone on board the ship yelled out. We want more than just a fight from you. We want a showdown, they said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at them. Why must idiots throw their lives away so foolishly? Luffy said with a sigh as he continued to sit under the tree with a bored expression on his face. Phew, fa. Someone laughed off to Luffy's left, getting his attention. I, Foxy, captain of the Foxy Pirates, hereby challenge you pirate to a Davy back fight. A short man with a weird hairstyle said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. Who the hell are you? Luffy asked as he looked at the man. Why, you don't know who I am? The man asked, sounding slightly hurt, to which Luffy shook his head. Not a clue, Luffy replied while shaking his head, causing the man to drop down on his hands and knees and start to sulk. He doesn't know who I am, he said in a disturbed voice while the 3 crew members standing beside him trying to comfort him. What is this Davy back fight? Nami asked with a confused look on her face. It is basically a sporting competition between pirate crews where pirates poach desirable members from other pirate crews, Robin said, enlightening those who did not know. A pirate crew with only 8 members, Foxy said as he stood up. What a bunch of weaklings, he said smugly, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him before he stood up from his sitting position. Captain. A member of Foxy crew yelled out, getting his captain's attention. That's the Thunder Demon. The man shouted, causing a lot of people to gasp out in shock. He is the guy who beat Crocodile. He continued. After hearing this, a slightly scared look appeared on Foxy's face. Doesn't matter, Foxy said as he cleared his throat, trying to hide the fact that he was intimidated by Luffy. I will still claim victor over you and your pitiful crew, he declared, causing Luffy to sigh and shake his head. Before anyone could say anything else, Nojiko's voice got everyone's attention. Hey, Captain, she called out, getting all of their attention. When they looked over, they saw Nojiko, Usopp, and Chopper walking towards them, but the thing that caught everyone's attention was what Nojiko had in her hands. She was holding 2 severed heads, which, judging from the strange mask they had around their eyes, they belonged to the Foxy Pirates. These guys attacked a nice old man who we just met, so we kill them, she said nonchalantly as she tossed the 2 heads forward. They killed Capote and Pickles. The crew on board the ship yelled out in horror as they stared at the severed heads of their comrades. Luffy just looked back at Foxy and channeled some lightning to his golden staff, changing its shape into a trident before he spoke. Well, that is a shame, Luffy said in a bored tone as he turned his attention to Foxy. Panicking, the captain of the Foxy Pirates launched an attack at Luffy before he had a chance to attack him. Slow beam, Foxy shouted, firing a purple beam of energy towards Luffy, who just stood there and let the beam engulf him. Was that it? Luffy asked, feeling neither pain nor missing any body parts. Time to die, I guess, he said as he took a step forward, only to see that his normal movements have been slowed down dramatically. Ha! That is the power of my slow fruit, Foxy declared proudly. Luffy just smirked before he turned his body into lightning and dashed forward at blinding speed, surprising Foxy and his entire crew. Luffy then appeared in front of Foxy and stepped his golden trident into the pirate's chest while looking directly into his eyes with a cold stare. Some advice, Luffy said in a chilling whisper. Lightning is still pretty fast even when you slow it down, he said before shoving the trident further into Foxy's chest until it came out his back. Captain, Foxy's crew yelled out in horror. The 3 crew members who were standing next to Foxy immediately tried to attack Luffy in anger, but before they had a chance to, they were all intercepted by Nojiko, Zoro, and Sanji. Snatch! Nojiko yelled as she appeared behind Foxy with her 3-section staff reared back, intercepting the girl who was about to attack Luffy. She then swung her arm forward in a whip-like motion. When the top section of the staff was about 1 foot away from the girl, the tip opened, and a metal spike extended out and pierced right through the girl's heart. Nojiko then pulled back on her staff, ripping the girl's heart right out of her chest, causing her to fall forward with a lifeless look on her face. Onigiri! Zoro yelled as he appeared to Luffy's right, intercepting another one of Foxy's crew who was about to attack Luffy. He swung all 3 of his swords simultaneously across his chest, resulting in 2 deep slashes to appear on the man's chest and 1 across his throat. The man then took 2 steps forward before blood gushed out from his wounds like a fountain, and he fell back into a pool of his own blood, staring up to the sky as he felt his life leave his body. Collier! Sanji yelled as he appeared to Luffy's left, intercepting another poor soul who tried to attack Luffy. He pivoted on his left leg and delivered a roundhouse kick to the man's neck, causing the sickening sound of the man's neck being broken to be heard before he too fell face first with a lifeless look on his face. Nicely handled, Luffy said with a nod as he stared at the 4 dead bodies around him. He then turned his attention to the large ship filled with the foxy pirates who were all staring at Luffy with a look of absolute terror on their face. "They're all demons," a random member of the foxy pirates yelled out, causing Luffy to smirk. "Now why would you say something like that?" Luffy said before he snapped his fingers. Snap! Just as the sound of his fingers clicked, a beam of lightning came down from the sky and engulfed the pirate ship. The beam lasted for 5 seconds before it vanished in the pirate ship with it. "Judgment," Luffy said lowly as the beam disappeared. He then summoned his thundercloud and pulled out a fruit basket from inside of it. The crew watched on in surprise and confusion as multiple fruits in the basket began changing into weirdly shaped and colored fruits with swirls on them. Did they just become devil fruits? Nami asked as she stared at the newly formed devil fruits in the basket. It is one of the things that is only known by a handful of the people in the world, Luffy replied as he picked up one of the devil fruits from the basket. When a devil fruit user dies, their devil fruit regenerates into a fruit similar it, he explained as he tossed the fruit up and down in his right hand. "Wow, I never heard about anything like that in all the years that I've been on the sea," Robin commented as she stared at Luffy. "It's kept on the down low by the government and some pretty powerful people," Luffy said as he began tucking all the new devil fruits into the thundercloud. "It may cause a lot of chaos if a lot of people discover that little fact," he added, causing everyone to nod in agreement. "Anyway, there is nothing for us to do on this island," he said. Everything sank back into the cloud. "Let's move on," he said, causing everyone to nod before making their way back to the ship. The crew then raised anchor and began sailing away from the island. They sailed for a couple of hours before another island came into view. "I see an island," Nami yelled out as she looked through a telescope. "It seems to be uninhabited," she added as she examined the island from afar. "Let's head over there and check it out," Luffy commented, causing Nami and Nojiko to nod before making their way to the rudder. "Sanji, how do we stand on supplies?" Luffy asked as he looked at his cook. "We are not low on supplies, but I would like to have more than what we currently got," Sanji replied, causing Luffy to nod his head. "Hopefully we can find some on that island," Luffy said as he stared at the island they were quickly approaching. It took about another 30 minutes for the Going Merry to reach the island. Once it reached the shore, they dropped anchor and proceeded to explore the island. The crew walked into the jungle that was on the island, gathering supplies as they went. "Chopper, did you manage to find any new herbs?" Usopp asked while holding on to a bag filled with supplies. "Yeah, this place has a lot of rare herbs that I can use to make medicine," Chopper replied while also holding on to a bag with herbs. "I got a good stock, but I am still looking in case I missed something," he added with a smile while looking around. "Which reminds me, I noticed something weird a second ago," Chopper said as he looked down at the ground. "There is a little grove along the trail here. I wonder what it is," he asked while looking down at the ground. Everyone looked down at the ground at the grove in the ground as they continued to walk. You're right, that is weird," Usopp said while looking at the grove in the trail. "It looks as though a bicycle came through here," he added, causing Luffy and Robin's eyes to narrow. "Come on, that doesn't make any sense," Sanji commented as he turned to look at Usopp. "There isn't anyone else on the island, why would there be a bicycle?" he said, causing Usopp to chuckle. "I guess you're right," Usopp chuckled out. Luffy then suddenly stopped and bent down to examine the grove, causing everyone to stop as well. He ran his finger across it before looking at Robin, who was at the back of the group looking at Luffy. He couldn't possibly be here on the island, Luffy thought to himself while looking at Robin. From the look on her face, Luffy could tell that she was thinking about the same thing he was. "Problem, Captain?" Zoro asked as he sensed Luffy's guard go up. "Problem right now? No," Luffy replied as he stood up. "In the near future? Probably," he said, confusing his crew. He did not say anything else. Inside he continued walking. As the group exited the jungle, they all let out a disappointed sigh. "There is nothing here but a whole lot of nothing," Nojiko commented as she looked around. At that exact moment, Chopper took off running in the direction of a big rock that seems to have a big mushroom growing out of it. "Whoa, I've never seen a mushroom this big before," Chopper said excitedly as he ran towards the giant rock. Luffy looked at the so-called mushroom and narrowed his eyes slightly in suspicion. I don't think that is a mushroom, Luffy said lowly. Before anyone could ask what he meant, they all saw Chopper get thrown back from behind the rock, causing the little reindeer to fall flat on his backside. Chopper! Zoro and Usopp called out simultaneously as they saw their friend get thrown back. There seems to be something behind the rock, Nojiko noted as he took out her 3-section staff. Let's go, Sanji said before him and the rest of the crew took off running, leaving Luffy standing in the same position looking at his crew charging towards the rock before he let out a sigh. So much for a relaxing journey to the next island, Luffy said to himself while shaking his head. He then walking towards his crew who already confronted the individual that was standing behind the rock. When Luffy arrived, he saw Robin on the ground with a terrified look on her face and sweat pouring off her as she stared at the man behind the rock. Luffy looked at her with a slightly sympathetic look on his face before he moved and stood in front of his crew blocking Robin's view of the man. Luffy, this guy is an admiral, Nami said in a slightly panicked voice. He has Robin scared out of her mind, she added as she stared at her captain's back. The fact that this guy could scare Robin this much really scared her as well, because Robin was one of the more strong-willed crew members who never seemed to fear anything. If everyone was being honest at this moment, they were all slightly scared due to Robin's reaction to the admiral, or in Usopp's case terrified. What re your orders, Captain? Zoro asked while standing to Luffy's right with 2 of his swords drawn. Robin's reaction may have slightly disturbed him, but he was still ready to jump headfirst into battle at his captain's orders. To Luffy's left was Sanji and Nojiko, who were both ready to attack like Zoro. Luffy was slightly impressed by the 3 of them, but at the same time, he found it somewhat amusing. Stand down, Luffy said, surprising his crew. Huh? They all asked simultaneously with a confused look on their faces. Don't be so eager to rush to your death, Luffy said as he stared at the admiral. He is way out your league, he added, surprising them. Even if all of you attacked him at the same time with all your might, the most you could probably do is force him back 2 steps, he said, causing his crew to stare at the giant of a man with a look of fear on their faces. Aren't you flattering me a bit too much, Luffy? The man said in a lazy voice, causing Luffy to chuckle. You're a long way from Navy HQ. Kuzan, Luffy said as he narrowed his eyes. Just as he spoke, thunderclouds began forming overhead and the wind began to pick up, causing Luffy's coat to flutter in the wind. And you're a long way from the New World, Kuzan replied calmly as he stared at the Luffy. I'm making my way back there now, Luffy said calmly before a slightly excited smirk appears on his face. You plan on stopping me? He asked in a dangerous, excited tone as lightning flashed overhead followed by deafening thunder. Chapter 38. When Gods Battle. Previously. You're a long way from Navy HQ. Kuzan, Luffy said as he narrowed his eyes. Just as he spoke, thunderclouds began forming overhead and the wind began to pick up, causing Luffy's coat to flutter in the wind. And you're a long way from the New World, Kuzan replied calmly as he stared at the Luffy. I'm making my way back there now, Luffy said calmly before a slightly excited smirk appears on his face. You plan on stopping me? He asked in a dangerous, excited tone as lightning flashed overhead followed by deafening thunder. Now, would you calm down? Kuzan said with a sigh as he saw Luffy gearing up for a fight. Like I told your crew, I'm just here on a stroll. I was not ordered here to capture you, he added before a yawn escaped his mouth. Luffy did not buy that explanation for 1 second. There was no way someone of Kuzan's status and power just happened to take a stroll and ended up crossing paths with Luffy and his crew. Besides Luffy, Kuzan said, getting Luffy's attention. You know the motto of justice, believe in, he said, causing Luffy to look at him for a few seconds before he sighed in disappointment and began to cancel off his power. Why are you relaxing, Luffy? Nojiko asked as she stared at Luffy with a puzzled look on her face. What is his sense of justice? Usopp asked, seeing that it made Luffy relax. Lazy justice, Luffy replied with a sigh, causing his crew to sweat drop. Robin was still on the ground staring at the Navy Admiral. She did not believe that man would just leave them alone because he was lazy or was not feeling up to it. She had witnessed his power firsthand and knew just what he was capable of, so she was not going to just lower her guard. She also knew even though Luffy appeared as though he was relaxing, she can tell his guard was still up. Speaking of Luffy, Robin was seriously puzzled at the strange relationship that her captain and the admiral seemed to have. Even though they were gearing up for a fight, she can tell that the two of them appear to be friends in some weird way. It was an absolutely bizarre idea to think about. Anyway, what I was saying was, Kuzan said, knocking Robin out of her thought. Hold on a minute, he said before he began lying down on the ground. Being on my feet too long makes me tired, he said in a lethargic voice as he laid down on the grass. Luffy stared at the lazy admiral and shook his head while the rest of his crew sweat dropped. Then maybe you shouldn't sleep standing up, Usopp said as he folded his arms. As I was saying, I have no intention of capturing you, Kuzan said, ignoring Usopp and surprising everyone. So, you can all just relax, he added from his position on the ground. I am only here to confirm the location of Nico Robin, who had not been seen since the Alabasta incident and is suspected she has been with you, he said, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. I'll come up with some report for headquarters. Now that you added another crew member with a price on their heads, your overall bounty is going to go up as well, Kuzan said as he held up his right hand as though he was about to start counting. Let us see. 200 million, he said while pointing at Luffy, plus 80 million, he said as he pointed to Zoro, and now 79 million, he added as he moved his hand in Robin's direction before he spoke again. That brings your overall bounty up to, screw it, some big ass number, he said lazily as he gave up on the math. Just do the math, Zoro said as he stared down at the man. Cut the bullshit, Kuzan, Luffy said in a serious tone as he narrowed his eyes. You and I both know the Marines have people for that kind of work. They are not going to send an admiral just to check up on the bounty of a pirate crew, he added as he looked down at the lazy admiral. You make it sound as though you are just any ordinary pirate, Kuzan replied as he stared up at Luffy with a slightly serious expression on his face as opposed to his usual dull expression. Luffy was about to reply to him, but before he could, he sensed a group of people coming up behind them. When he turned around, he saw a small group of people exiting the tree line. They had all looked like they went through hell and came back. Is it really true? Are you really a Marine? One of the men among the group asked while looking at Kuzan. Who the hell are all these people? Nojiko asked as she stared at the newcomers. Well, they are probably castaways who washed ashore, Kuzan said, getting everyone's attention. There was a passenger liner that was reported missing sometime about a month ago. Last seen somewhere in this area, he said as he propped his head upon his hand. I'm guessing it sank and these are the survivors, he added, causing a few of Luffy's crew to look at the people in pity. Before Luffy could even give his crew orders, they all sprang into action, acting on their own accord. Chopper began examining the people and treating any wounds that he could, with Nami and Nojiko helping him. Sanji and Usopp went in search of food for the people to eat. Luffy, Robin, and Zoro were the only ones who stood right where they were, watching on, or in Luffy's case staying close to Kuzan just in case the admiral decides to try something. So, what happened to you guys? Sanji asked as he prepared some food on the grill. We were on our way back from a gourmet tour when a giant frog doing the front crawl crashed into the side of our boat, shattering it, one of the survivors said, causing Luffy to smirk. Come on, everyone knows frogs can only do the breaststroke, Usopp replied, not buying the story. That's Yokozuna, Luffy said, getting their attention. He is kind of famous in these parts, he added with a chuckle. After everyone finished eating, Kuzan suddenly stood up, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. All you gather your stuff, he said to the passengers of the shipwreck. I happen to know of an inhabited island not too far from here. You go there and ask them to help you out, he said, causing the people to rejoice. The crew helped the people load their cargo into a small cart. Once done, Kuzan walked over to the edge of the island and stuck one of his hands into the water for a few seconds. While his hands were in the water, a giant sea king launched out of the water, sending everyone except Luffy and Robin into a panic. Hey, get out of there! Usopp yelled to Kuzan, but the admiral did not move an inch. Watch out! Nami and Nojiko yelled at the same time as they saw the Sea King was moving towards the Admiral. Ice Age. Kuzan called out. No less than a second after he said that the entire ocean in front of him was frozen over. There was nothing but solid ice as far as the eye can see. Even the Sea King which was about to attack him was frozen to the core. Everyone barring Luffy and Robin had their jaws hanging loosely from their mouths and their eyes bulging out of their heads. Luffy had to admit that it was impressive, but he had seen far more impressive things in the New World. He just froze the ocean, Nami said in an utterly shocked voice. I can't believe what I'm seeing, her sister said as she dropped her 3-section staff. To think that there were more monsters like Luffy out there, Usopp said in a low whisper, but Luffy heard him. It'll stay like that for a week, Kuzan said as he stood up and walked back up to the group of stunned stowaways and pirates. Head out to sea in that direction, he said while pointing off in the distance. And take your time, you should reach the island in 4 days. Do be sure to dress warm, it'll be a bit on the cold side, he added before he bent down and picked up his coat before he began walking away. Am I dreaming? Asked one of the castaways. The sea is as solid as the ground. We can finally cross it and get off this island, he said with tears of happiness streaming down his face. Luffy's crew helped the people get their cart with their cargo down to the ice before waving them goodbye. The crew was down on the ice with them while only Luffy and Zoro stayed up top. While all of them relaxed thinking Kuzan was gone, Luffy knew he was not that far from where they were standing. The crew then began making their way back up from the ice while Luffy and Zoro watched on. When they got to the top, they all began walking back inland with plans to head to their ship, but Luffy knew they were not going to get the ship so easily. As they walked about 10 feet away from the shore, they all saw Kuzan sitting on the grass staring at them with a conflicted look on his face. What's wrong, Kuzan? Too tired to get back to Navy HQ? Luffy asked in an uncaring tone. You were as troublesome as your grandfather, Monkey D. Luffy, Kuzan said, causing Luffy to flinch slightly at the mention of his eccentric grandfather. Both of you are so hard to figure out, he said, causing Luffy to chuckle with a slightly nervous tone. Luffy's grandfather? Nami asked in a curious tone. Come to think about it, we don't really know anything about Luffy's family, Nojiko said as they all started at their captain. Your captain has a very complicated family tree, Kuzan said with a sigh. Especially when it comes to his mother, he said, increasing the curiosity of Luffy's crew. As he mentioned the Luffy's mother, a loud thunderclap reverberated overhead, and thunder clouds began forming in the sky. Don't step out of bounds, Kuzan, Luffy said in a dangerous tone. Anyway, as I was saying, Kuzan said, ignoring Luffy. Your grandfather helped me out once, a long time ago. It is why I am here, he said before looking up and making eye contact with Luffy. I wanted to see you and Nico Robin together with my own eyes, he said before a serious look came on his face as he stared at Luffy. On second thought, maybe I should just kill you, he added, causing Luffy's crew to place their guards up. Now come on, is that any way to treat the grandson of the man who helped you out? Luffy asked mockingly as the wind began to intensify with the storm that was brewing overhead. The government may not think much of your crew, but they do consider you a threat in the same league as the 4 emperors, he said, causing Luffy's crew to feel insulted. But I know better than that. You may be few in numbers, but with the assembly of Rouges you have gathered here, this crew will likely be a serious problem in the future, especially with you as their captain, he said, earning an excited smirk from Luffy. Considering the circumstances regarding your initial bounty, the numerous actions you have taken, and the speed of your overall progress, I've fought outlaws all of my life, but thinking about how you bunch will turn out scares the hell out of me, Kuzan admitted as he continues to stare down Luffy. Nice to know we can put the fear of God into the heart of an admiral, Luffy said, clearly not taking Kuzan seriously. You do know who she is, don't you, Luffy? Kuzan asked as he turned his attention to Robin. I am well aware of who she is and what she has done, Luffy replied as he tightens his grip on his golden staff. She is a member of my crew and she's a friend. So, if you want to get to her you are going to have to kill me, Luffy said, causing his crew to smile. She has lied, cheated, and betrayed every single organization she has been a member of, Kuzan said as he slowly stood up to his feet. Not one single solitary member has ever escaped except for her, he added as he cracked his neck. What makes you think that she won't do the same to you? He asked. It was a valid question in his mind, but Luffy did not care. "'Cause with me she doesn't have to be afraid of you or the government," Luffy said with a smirk. "I already showed her that I can destroy a Buster Call, and I am guessing that I am about to show her that I can protect her from an admiral too," he said before a loud thunderclap echoed throughout the sky and lightning flash overhead. "You know I can't just let you leave the island," the admiral said as he narrowed his eyes. "And you know I can't let you touch my crew," Luffy countered before he reached up with the right hand, grabbed his captain's coat and pulled it off. He then walked up behind Robin and placed it over her shoulders. He then walked by Nami and placed his straw hat on her head. "You all get back to the ship and get as far away from the island as possible," Luffy ordered as he walked up and stood a short distance away from Kuzan. "But Luffy," Nami began in a worried voice. "You all are strong, yes," Luffy said with a sigh. "But you are not on this level as yet," Luffy said honestly, causing them to look down at the ground. Zoro clenched his fist in frustration over the fact that he was still too weak to stand by his captain's side. "The log pose should be pointing to Water 7, head there. I'll catch you," Luffy said as he motioned to leave. The crew then took off in the direction of the ship. "You don't really think I am just going to let them go, do you?" Kuzan said before holding up his right hand. 5 arrows made of ice began to form in front of him. Before he could fire it out, however, a bolt of lightning came down from the sky and struck him in the middle of his head with enough power to destroy the upper half of his body. The entire upper half of Kuzan's body burst apart in a shower of ice, causing the 5 arrows to break apart as well. "I'm your opponent," Luffy said in a cold voice as he watches Kuzan reform from the waist up. Thanks to his observation Haki, Luffy could tell his crew was running through the forest, almost making it to the ship. When Kuzan was fully reformed, the right half of his hair and body were covered in frost and Luffy could see his breath every time he exhaled. "That hurt a bit," Kuzan commented as both he and Luffy stared each other down for a few minutes, all the while the temperature in the surrounding area began to drop, and the lightning storm overhead only intensified, causing lightning to strike down randomly all over the island and parts of the frozen ocean. Kuzan then bent down and grabbed a handful of grass from the ground before throwing it out to the side and blowing a breath of cold air on it, freezing the blades of grass into a long sword. "Ice Saber," he called out as he held the saber in one hand. His hand then turned black with armament Haki along with the sword. Seeing this, Luffy held his staff out in front of him and channeled his armament Haki into it, turning the golden staff black as well. Without any warning, the two of them then dashed towards each other at moderate speed with their respective weapons drawn back. When they were about 5 feet apart from each other, they swung their weapons at each other. When the black staff contacted the black saber, a loud explosion occurred which created a powerful shockwave that shook the entire island. Luffy and Kuzan stared at each other as they engaged in a battle of strength. Seeing that it was going nowhere, they both pushed off each other and put some distance between themselves. Stopping about 25 feet away from each other, Kuzan dropped the saber and held his right hand out towards Luffy. "Ice block. Pheasant beak," he called out, causing a massive wave of ice in the shape of a pheasant to emerge from his hand and rushed towards Luffy. The pheasant had to be at least 50 feet wide and 20 feet tall. Raising his staff and pointing it towards the incoming ice bird, Luffy began channeling a large round of lightning into his staff. 100 million volt thunder dragon. Luffy called out, casing a massive serpentine dragon-shaped blast of lightning emerges from the tip of the staff and rushes towards the oncoming ice bird. The giant dragon made of lightning broke the ground apart as it rushed towards the pheasant, while Kuzan's ice bird froze the ground as it rushed towards the dragon. When the two attacks collided, a giant explosion occurred that sent tremors well beyond the island. With the crew had made it back to the ship safely, but they were forced to dodge multiple lightning strikes. They were all currently standing on the deck staring at the island as the ship sailed away from the island in the direction the log pose was pointing. The waters around the island were extremely rough and violent, causing the ship to be tossed around like a rag doll on the water. They were some ways away from the island but could still experience the effects of the clash that was taken place. I hope Luffy is okay, a worried Chopper said. Before anyone could say anything to reassure the little reindeer, they all saw a giant bird made of ice and a giant serpentine dragon made of lightning charging towards each other. When the two creatures collided, it created a large tower of ice and lightning seemingly battling for dominance. Then suddenly the entire ocean around them shook as the shockwave from the clash had reached them. Just what is this? Usopp asked as he felt the ocean tremble. When gods do battle, the world itself trembles with fear, Robin said as she stared at the tower of lightning and ice. With Luffy. Luffy watched as his lightning dragon slowly overpowered Kuzan's pheasant and made its way towards the admirals, who easily jumped to his left, dodging out of the way. As soon as Kuzan moved out of the way, allowing the dragon to crash and explode into the ground, he turned his attention to where Luffy was standing. When he looked over, however, he saw that Luffy was gone. Looking for me? Luffy asked from behind Kuzan. Turning his head slightly, Kuzan saw Luffy standing behind him with his hockey-covered fist drawn back. Faster than he could react, Luffy punched the admiral squared in the jaw, sending him rocking away towards the trees. Teleporting and appearing above Kuzan as he was flying towards the tree line, Luffy covered his foot in hockey and brought his heel down onto the admiral's midsection. Storm Breaker. Luffy called out as he slammed his heel into Kuzan's stomach at lightning speed, sending the admiral crashing into the ground with such force that it created a small crater on impact. Landing on the ground beside the crater, Luffy looked down and saw Kuzan lying there staring up at him. You added hockey at the very last second before I hit you, Luffy noted as he stared down at the admiral laying on the ground. Well, that last attack would have broken a few ribs if I hadn't, Kuzan said in a lazy tone while remaining on the ground. But even so, you shouldn't let your head down, Kuzan said while narrowing his eyes. Ice time capsule, he called, causing a wave of rush from his body along the ground towards Luffy. Widening his eyes slightly, Luffy did not react in time as the wave of ice reached the bottom of his feet. The ice froze the bottom of his feet over and quickly began working itself way up Luffy's body until he was completely frozen in a block of ice. Letting out a sigh, Kuzan slowly stood up and cracked his joints. I doubt that would be enough to actually kill you, he said as he stared at the frozen Luffy only to see the block of ice smoking and slowly melting away, causing him to raise an eyebrow in slight confusion. It did not take more than 3 seconds for the ice to completely melt away, revealing Luffy standing there perfectly fine, with a bored look on his face. That was cold, he commented as he stared at Kuzan. The two stared at each other for a few minutes before Kuzan made the first move. Ice spike. Kuzan called out as he raised one foot in the air and stopped the ground, causing multiple ice spikes to burst out from the ground around Luffy, stabbing him in all directions. Luffy just stood there perfectly fine, completely unbothered by the fact that he had about 6 ice spikes stagging into his midsection. He then calmly walked through the ice spikes as though they were not even there. Fighting a Logia user is always a pain, Kuzan said with a sigh while scratching his head, causing Luffy to chuckle at him. I think it's time we get a bit more serious, Luffy said as lightning began sparking around his body. It'll be a pain but okay, Kuzan said in a lethargic tone as the temperature in the area dropped more and the ground around him began to turn to ice. Luffy then raised his hand up to the sky and spoke. Judgment. He called out, causing a giant pillar of lightning to come down from the sky in the direction of where Kuzan was standing. Seeing that he was in danger, the admiral jumped back about 20 feet, allowing the giant pillar to strike down the ground where he was standing. The moment the pillar of lightning touched down, it destroyed everything in the immediate area around it, while at the same time piercing a 10 feet wide hole in the ground. When the pillar disappeared, Kuzan saw a 10-foot wide hole that seemed to go right through the island with molten rocks along the inside of the hole. Turning his attention to Luffy, the admiral kneeled down and pressed both of his palms on the ground and smoke. Arctic freeze. Kuzan called out, dropping the temperature even further, causing the ground itself on the entire island to freeze along with Tress and Pants on the island. He then stood up and held both of his arms up towards Luffy. Falling glacier. He yelled, freezing the water moisture in the air above Luffy, creating a massive block of ice that began falling towards Luffy. Making a fist, Luffy reared his arm back, covered it with lighting before punching the air above him. "El Thor!" he yelled as he punched the air, releasing all the lighting. He built up in his arms, causing a giant beam of lighting to shoot out of his arm and envelop the entire block of ice that was falling towards him, causing it to evaporate in an instant. Luffy was prepared to turn and say something smug to Kuzan, but his observation haki alerted him to danger behind him. Turning his head, sliding to look behind him, he saw Kuzan rising up from the frozen island with a cold look on his face and his haki-infused fist already making its way to Luffy. Similar to what Luffy did to him, Kuzan delivered a haki-infused punch to Luffy's face, sending the captain tumbling along the ice. Stopping himself from tumbling further, Luffy positioned himself right way up and stabbed his staff into the ice to stop himself. Once he came to a stop, he narrowed his eyes and stared at Kuzan before he pulled the staff out of the ice and turned his body into lighting and dashed towards Kuzan at lightning speed. Kuzan covered both of his hands with haki and held it up in front of his face in time to block a haki-infused kick from Luffy, but the kick had too much power behind it. It sent the Admiral skidding back 50 feet along the ice. When the Admiral looked up at his opponent, the only thing he saw was a black bolt of lightning coming towards him. Knowing that it was too close to fully dodge, he turned his body slightly to the right, allowing the bolt to pierce through the side of his abdomen. Blood sprayed out from the wound and fell on the ice. Placing one hand over the wound, he froze it in ice, stopping the bleeding temporarily. "Haki-infused lightning," Kuzan said as he looked up at Luffy, who was calmly walking towards him. "Quite a deadly combo," he added. "I am a deadly pirate," Luffy said while walking towards the injured admiral. "It would have been a big problem for me if you were serious about killing me," Kuzan said with a sigh, causing Luffy to chuckle. "I would have been in some trouble if you were serious about capturing me as well," Luffy said with a chuckle as he stopped in front of the admiral. "I think it's best we end this now before one of us does end up dead," he added as he ran his hand through his hair. "I agree," Kuzan said lazily as he looked around at the storm clouds. "You feel it, don't you?" he suddenly asked in a serious voice while looking at Luffy. "Yeah, a big storm is coming," Luffy replied as he narrowed his eyes and looked out at sea. "The effects will be felt in all corners of the world," he added, causing Kuzan to nod. "The peace that the government is trying so hard to protect is about to come to an end," he said with a sigh. "It has only been 4 years since that incident and we are already heading towards another," Kuzan said with a sigh while Luffy smirked, thinking back to the incident. "And I got a feeling that like 4 years ago you are going to be in the center of all this trouble," he added, causing Luffy to chuckle. "As nice as it is to reminisce about the good old days," Luffy said as he summoned a thundercloud down from the sky. "I have to get to my crew. I'll be seeing you," he said as he hopped onto the thundercloud. "I'll be seeing you a lot sooner than you think," Kuzan replied, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. Putting it off to the side, Luffy and the thundercloud took off into the sky, leaving the admiral back on the island. Luffy then reached his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was his own vivre card. He had the large piece to his card on the ship inside his thundercloud throne, so the small piece he had in his hand was pointing in the direction of the larger piece on the ship. Following the card's direction, Luffy found his ship and his crew in little to no time. Turning his body into lightning, he teleported himself down to the deck of the ship, scaring his crew. "Did you miss me?" he asked with a smirk on his face as he appeared on the deck. "Luffy!" yelled most of his crew except Zoro and Robin, who smiled when they saw their captain. Chopper was the first to launch himself into Luffy with tears streaming down his face. Soon everyone else ran towards their captain. "Did you win, Luffy?" Usopp asked while looking at Luffy. "There was no winner or loser as neither of us was serious about killing each other," Luffy replied as he reached up and grabbed his hat off Nami's head and placed it back on his. "So Aokiji is still alive?" Nami asked, sounding slightly scared. "Yeah, I like Kuzan," Luffy said before prying himself off Chopper and walked towards Robin, who was wearing his captain's coat. "You don't have to worry about him," he said as he took his coat off her. "Yes, Captain," Robin said with a small smile. "Well then, let's get going to Water 7. Luffy ordered before making his way to his throne. "Aye, Captain," his crew yelled back. Chapter 39. The Crimson Breaker. Luffy was currently sitting on his throne on the rear deck drinking a glass of whiskey. It had been about 4 hours since he had his battle with Aokiji. They were currently sailing through calm waters on their way towards Water 7. Luffy got up from his throne and made his way down to the main deck where his crew was relaxing. "How's our heading, Nami?" he asked as he walked down the stairs. Nami, who was sitting on a lawn chair on the main deck with her sister, looked at her log pose before looking back at her captain and spoke. "We are right on course, Captain," she replied, earning a nod. "Our next island should be Water 7, Luffy said as he looked at his crew. "We should arrive there in 3 days, he added, confusing Nami. "How do you know it's Water 7? She asked as she stood up and walked towards Luffy. "Those people who were stranded on the last island said that they saw a frog ding the forward crawl," he said with a small smile. "That's Yokozuna. He lives around Water 7 and is always by the sea train," he explained. "Sea train?" Usopp asked in a suspicious tone. "That's right, a sea train. It is a train and runs on top of the water," Luffy said, surprising his crew. "What's for lunch?" he asked Sanji as he ignored the surprised look on his crew's faces. "Seafood and some veggies," Sanji replied as he wiped the surprised look from his face. Luffy nodded before making his way over to the kitchen to eat with his crew following behind him. Once inside the kitchen, he sat down at the head of the table with Robin and Nojiko taking the seat on either side of him. Nami sat down beside her sister and Chopper chose to sit beside Robin while Zoro sat at the other end of the table opposite Luffy, leaving Usopp to take the open sea beside Chopper, leaving the seat opposite from him for Sanji. Sanji then began laying out the food he had prepared for lunch and Luffy had to admit, it was quite the spread. There was grilled sea king meat, baked fish, lobster, shrimp, some pretty big crabs, some baked potatoes, and some salad. "Wow, Sanji," Nojiko said in amazement as she stared at the amount of deliciously looking food Sanji had prepared. "This looks amazing," she added, causing the resident cook of the Straw Hat crew to go crazy after hearing the compliment. "Oh, thank you Nojiko, my love," Sanji called out with hearts in his eyes. "But it was the captain who told me to prepare a feast," Sanji said, causing everyone to turn their attention over to Luffy. "Really?" Chopper asked as he looked at Luffy. "What's the occasion, Luffy?" Usopp asked. "Nothing special," Luffy replied with a shrug. "I just figured you guys would have probably been a bit shaken up after witnessing my fight with Kuzan," he said, causing all of them to recall the memory of the fight that they saw. "So, I asked Sanji to prepare a feast to cheer you all up a bit," he added, earning a few smiles from his crew. "So, dig in," he said as he motioned them to start eating. The crew did just that. They started helping themselves to food Sanji had prepared. "That fight with you and that Admiral guy was so cool," Chopper said with a mouthful of food and stars in his eyes. "You guys were like bam, bam, boom. And the entire sea shook." The little reindeer while doing punching motions with his hooves, causing Luffy and Robin to chuckle at his antics. "That wasn't anything special," Luffy replied as he bit down on a lobster tail. "Neither Kuzan nor I were going all out," he added. "If we really were serious, we probably would still have been fighting to this very moment," he said, surprising his crew. "I can't believe that they're people that strong out there," Nami commented as she thought back to her past beliefs. Before she had met Luffy and the crew, she had always Arlong was the strongest there is. She could have never imagined there being someone more powerful than him, but after entering the Grand Line and meeting Luffy, she could now see just how naive she was for thinking that. The people she met so far in the Grand Line make Arlong look like a child in terms of power. "There are monsters like Kuzan all over the New World," Luffy said as he bites down on a baked potato. "Now that you've all seen what awaits deeper in the Grand Line, what are you going to do?" Luffy asked with a raised eyebrow as he stared at each of his crew. "I'm going to have to train harder," Zoro said as he narrowed his eyes and stared at his captain. "I can't be the strongest swordsman if some little admiral is enough to scare me away," she said, causing Luffy to smirk. "Same here," Usopp suddenly said, surprising Luffy. "I am going to become a brave warrior of the sea. I can't be scared of an admiral," he declared proudly. "Yeah, the greatest doctor in the world can't be scared of an admiral." Chopper yelled with a determined look on his face. I plan on charting a map of the entire world, so I can't allow some admiral to stop me. Nami said as he slammed her fist down on the table. I will be damned if some admiral stands in my way of going to the All Blue. Sanji said, joining in his crewmates' proclamations. Yeah, I plan on becoming the most feared woman in all the seas. Nojiko said, causing everyone's eyebrow to rise at that declaration. How can I allow some Navy admiral to be stronger than me? She added as she clenched her fist. I thought your dream was to help your sister chart the world, Luffy said. He turned and looked at Nojiko. It was, but being out here on the open seas living the life of a pirate has made me realize I want something more, Nojiko replied with a resolute look on her face. Luffy nodded his head before turning to the last member of his crew who had yet to make any sort of declaration. Seeing her captain looking at her, Robin took a small sip of her wine before she spoke. I too will become stronger so that I can defend against those who will try and stop me from finding out the true history of the world, she said in a soft and dignified voice, causing Luffy to chuckle while the rest of the crew's head dropped at the less energetic response. I expected nothing less from the crew of the future king of the pirates, Luffy said with a chuckle, causing his crew to smile back at him before turning their attention back to their food. He was about to say something else to them, but before he could, the sound of a transponder snail ringing filled the kitchen. Purururu purururu purururu. Sighing to himself, Luffy placed down his fork, reached into his coat, and pulled out a medium-sized transponder snail and a white one. Purururu purururu purururu. He then plugged a wire from the white transponder snail into the other one before he picked up the microphone. Purururu 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 clack. Yes, he said into the microphone while his crew turned their attention to him and the snails. It's Paula, a woman said through the snail. How are things coming along with the Hino branch? Luffy used as he picked up back his fork and stuck it into a shrimp. Everything is settled for now, she reported. We set up a makeshift base here for the time until Paul could come to build the actual one, she said, causing Luffy to nod. He sent some people by to inspect the island and they were asking me what I wanted the front to be, so I figured I should call you and ask what you wanted it to be, she said. It doesn't matter what it is, Luffy replied into the snail. Majority of what the Hino branch will be doing is going to be deep underground. Whatever you want the front to be on the surface is up to you, Luffy said, surprising her. It's just going to act as a front to trick the Marines, he added. I understand, Paula replied through the snail. But whatever it is, it will have to be believable with the number of ships that will be coming through here, she said, causing Luffy to nod. Just build a hotel, Robin said from beside Luffy. A hotel? Luffy asked as he began to think about Robin's suggestion. That's a clever idea, Nojiko chimed in. The hotel not only acts as a front, but it can also gather information on the guests that will be staying there, she said, causing Luffy to nod his head. With how far spread the Hino branch is throughout the world, it will be easy to spread the word of a brand new luxury hotel on the Grand Line, Luffy said with a smirk on his face as he thought about the possibilities of a hotel as a front could offer. People from all over the world would probably want to go to the hotel, Nami said as she began thinking about the amount of money they could make. Why stop at just a hotel? Luffy suddenly said. Turn the entire island into some sort of resort. It will provide the perfect cover for all the ships coming in and out with the black market goods, he said. Wouldn't that be too expensive? Paula asked, bringing up a good point. Don't worry about that, Luffy said, easing her worries. Paul is very good at what he does, and he has a lot of connections, so it won't cost a thing, he said before taking a sip of his whiskey. Well then, I will tell his people that I want to build a resort with a luxury hotel on the island, Paula said, earning a nod from Luffy. You can call it the Spider's Tropical Resort, Luffy suggested, causing Paula to giggle through the transponder snail. I like the sound of that, she said with a giggle. Anything else you have to report? Luffy asked. Well, we only recently set up the temporary information relay center that Marianne has taken charge of, she explained, causing Luffy to nod. We are now fully connected to all the other branches around the world, and they are sending information through all hours of the day, she said, causing a small smile to appear on Luffy's face after hearing about the success of his intelligence network. That's good to hear, Luffy said with a smile. We've also been testing how fast we can spread information throughout the world over the past couple of days, she said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. After sorting through some of the information we gathered, I chose one that I judged to be not so important and relayed it to all the other branches with the order to spread it, she said, impressing Luffy. And the results? Luffy asked with an eyebrow raised. He and his crew were genuinely curious about how fast they could spread information throughout the world. Within 24 hours, the information made its way back to me with only a few minor changes from the original, she said, impressing Luffy once more. That's impressive, Luffy said with an approving nod. That should get better as the branch grows larger, Robin said, chiming in. Correct. With more people the information will spread faster, Paula said through the transponder snail. What of the Chitin branch? Luffy asked, wanting to know about his other branch. Hang on, let me grab the report I put together for all of them, Paula said before the sounds of papers being shuffled around could be heard through the snail. Okay. Daz has set up shop on Jaya as you had suggested, and he has managed to get a couple of salvagers to join him, she reported, causing Luffy to nod his head, getting a fairly good idea who those salvagers were. Mr. 5 and M's Valentine just recently placed a rather large order of medicine from the formerly named Drum Kingdom, now named the Cherry Blossom Kingdom, she said, causing Chopper to perk up hearing about his homeland. How is the Cherry Blossom Kingdom doing? Luffy asked after seeing his doctor's reaction. The kingdom is flourishing under their new King Dalton, Paula said, causing Luffy to nod. They had requested a large number of various herbs from all four blues, most of which have been delivered already. Only a shipment of spring grass from the West Blue is still on its way, she reported. Thanks to the Chitin branch, they are trading with numerous kingdoms throughout the Grand Line. This shipment of medicine request by Mr. 5 and M's Valentine will be the first shipment from the Cherry Blossom Kingdom to leave the Grand Line, she finished, causing Luffy and his crew to nod their head. I'm glad everything is going well for Doctorine and everyone else back home, Chopper said with a bright smile on his face. What else do you have to report? Luffy asked. Ms. Merry Christmas and Mr. 4 have been busy since they set up shop in the North Blue, Paula said, piquing Luffy's interest. They brokered an arms deal, supplying weapons to a small kingdom. They also sold some information to a local mob as well as acquired some antique paintings for the King of Nimbus Kingdom, she said, impressing Luffy. What kind of information they sold? He asked, curious about what the mob was up to. A local marine captain is involved in some dealings with some pirates along with cheating on his wife with his second officer, she said, causing Luffy to chuckle. So, we sold the mob the blackmailing information for a price of 25 million, she said, causing Nami's eyes to perk up at the mention of money. Make sure to gather information on the mob as well, Luffy ordered before taking a sip of his whiskey. If they are going to blackmail the marine captain, make sure to get all of their dealings recorded, he said, wanting to have intelligence for future exploitations. I already have people on it, Paula replied in a positive tone. Even though Ms. Merry Christmas and Mr. 4 have been the busiest, Isaac and the West Blue operations have been the most profitable, she said, causing Luffy to smirk. Due to the civil war in the Black Raven Kingdom, he was able to exploit the need for weapons by both the rebels and the royal soldiers, she reported, causing Luffy to nod his head, remembering Isaac telling him about this already. He had told me about this already, Luffy said while nodding. Well, the war was showing signs of being over, but by some strange occurrence a single rebel and a single royal guard reignited the entire thing, causing Isaac to order a whole new shipment of weapons for both parties, she said in an amused tone, causing Luffy to smirk. Some strange occurrences, huh? He said in an equally amused tone. Yeah, it was almost like someone restarted it on purpose, she said, causing Luffy to chuckle. Apart from that, Isaac managed to recruit a bunch of people for both branches in the West Blue as well as taken quite a fair number of pirate crews under him, all sailing under your flag, she reported, causing Luffy and his crew to smirk. Sounds like he is getting down to business, Luffy commented in an approving tone. Now on to the East Blue, Paula said, getting the majority of the crew to perk up. Johnny and Yosaku have chosen to set up their main base of operation on the Konami Islands on the ruins of Arlong Park, now renamed Hell's Park, she said, causing Nami and Nojiko's eyes to widen in surprise. The people on the island seemed to welcome them there with open arms and even assisted in the building of the base there. Paula added, surprising Luffy, but he chalked it up to the villagers remembering the duo as part of his crew. With the East Blue being the most peaceful of the four blues, there is not that high a demand for weapons there. The most they have been doing to providing a few clients with some forged documents, compliments of one of your associates from the address book, some rare animal hide, and even some exotic pets for a few nobles, she informed, causing Luffy to nod. It was about what he had expected from the East. We are expecting them to place a large order for medicine from the Cherry Blossom Kingdom, but the client has yet to come up with the full amount of money, she added. The boys seem to be doing well for now, Luffy commented, causing his crew to nod their heads. Anything else to report? He asked after hearing about the last of all of the oceans under his domain. There was a brief moment of silence from Paula before she spoke again. The Marines are aware of us, she said, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. That was fast, he commented. They don't know who is in charge of what, but they know we're out there and they know what our business is, she said, causing Luffy to contemplate for a while. They also know the organization is run by a mysterious man named Asura, she added. Well, aren't they informed? Luffy said sarcastically. I have been receiving reports of Cipher Pol agents trying to join our ranks, she said, surprising Luffy. How do you know this? Luffy asked with an eyebrow raised in the air. One of the first things I had the Hino branch do is have some people join the Marines as spies, while some of them specifically tried to join Cipher Pol, with only a few who had devil fruit powers being accepted, she said, causing Luffy to chuckle. I guess Ms. All Sunday was right when she recommended that I chose you to head up the Hino branch, Luffy said with a chuckle as he turned and looked at Robin, causing a slight blush to appear on her face. I aim to please, Paula said through the transponder snail. I have incredibly detailed reports from those spies inside Cipher Pol about the orders to spy on Hell's Company, along with the names and photographs of the Cipher Pol agents that are being sent in as recruits. It makes turning them away a lot easier, she said with a chuckle. I will be in Water 7 in the coming days, send me the reports of everything to read through, Luffy ordered through the snail. There is a small inn called Heaven on Earth, have someone wait for me there with the reports, he added. As you wish, sir, Paula responded. If there is nothing else to report, I'll be going, Luffy said. Until next time, sir, Paula said before handing up the transponder snail. Placed the transponder sail down and back into his coat before returning to his lunch. Business seems to be doing well, Robin commented as he looked at her captain. Yeah, it is progressing along nicely, Luffy replied with a smile. The organization was expanding and placing itself among the most prolific corporations in the world. In about 5 to 6 months it will where I need it to be, he added as he placed a shrimp in his mouth. In 5 to 6 months its roots in both the underworld and the conventional world would be so deep it would be impossible for the Marines or anyone else to get rid of it, Sanji commented before lighting a cigarette. That's true, however, I think in 5 to 6 months is when the trouble will arrive, Nami added, causing Luffy to nod, knowing what she means. What do you mean, Nami? Chopper asked as he turned to look at the ship's navigator. If I recall correctly, she began as she places his finger on her chin and began to think. Luffy once told us about the bosses of the underworld. I do not think they are going to take it lightly to their territory being encroached upon, she said, causing everyone to nod their heads in agreement. She's right, Nojiko said, agreeing with her sister. We are going to be ruffling a few feathers in the underworld, she added. Not quite, Luffy said, getting all of their attention. Their influence is mainly in the New World. It does not stretch over to Paradise, he said, causing a few confused looks among his crew. Why is that? Usopp asked with a confused look on his face. You would think that they would try to secure their influence across the world, why only stick to one ocean? He asked. The reason for them only being based in the New World is mainly because the Navy's control and presence in the New World are practically non-existent, Luffy said, surprising his crew. The New World is controlled by the 4 emperors and the Navy does not want to start a war with one of the emperors, so they do their best to stay clear of their territory. This allows the underworld and all of its many businesses to flourish, he informed, surprising his crew once more. We are the first and possibly the only underworld organization here in Paradise, he added with a smirk before taking a sip of his whiskey. Which means we are going to profit the most. Nami said in an excited tone as she began thinking about tons of money they will make. Luffy chuckled and shook his head at his navigator's behavior. 2 days later. It had been 2 days since Luffy had his fight with Kuzan and since he spoke to Paula. The Going Merry was currently sailing along smoothly through calm waters with a good wind behind them. They were still about a day's journey away from Water 7, but everything was going along nicely. The past 2 days had been peaceful for the most part. They had encountered a pirate ship along with a merchant trading vessel to which they happily raided and helped themselves to their goods and treasure. The crew had also acted on their declarations during the feast 2 days ago to get stronger. Whenever they had some free time, they would spend it on the main deck training with either their devil fruit, their haki, or their weapons. Luffy was impressed at their dedication to getting stronger. Their training did show some progress, nothing too major but progress nonetheless. Nojiko managed to get her armament haki to last slightly longer than it used to. She still lacks control, but it was a step in the right direction. Usopp managed to better understand his observation haki and spent the entire 2 days training with it and his slingshot. Thanks to a few pointers from Luffy, he improved it a little bit to where for a few seconds he can see the fish swimming in the water under the ship. Like Usopp, Sanji spent his time training his observation haki when he was not in the kitchen. Even though he was disappointed at first when he found out he was more adept in observation instead of armament, he soon saw the benefits to having observation haki and chose to work on that for the past 2 days, opting to focus on armament at a later date. Nami and Zoro on the other hand split their time the past 2 days between both armament and observation haki. Luffy had thought that Nami had an affinity for observation when they were training on that abandoned island, but now, he was not so sure what her affinity was. Chopper and Robin, being the only 2 devil fruit users on the crew apart from Luffy, spent the past 2 days experimenting with their respected devil fruits. Chopper spent his time experimenting with his rumble balls and pushing his transformation to the absolute limit, while Robin too pushed herself to the limit with regards to the amount of body parts she can summon and the range at which she can summon. How much success the two of them had with their training, Luffy had not the slightest clue. Currently, all of them were continuing their training at various parts of the ship while Luffy was sitting on his throne staring out at the back of the ship. Nami, Sanji, Robin, and Chopper were on the main deck doing their respected training while Usopp was up in the crow's nest on lookout duty. Zoro was training in the front of the ship while Nojiko was on the rear deck with Luffy. While everyone was busy with their training, Luffy leaned back into his throne and stared up at the clouds in the sky through narrowed eyes. The air around the ship was calm and peaceful, and it made Luffy a bit nervous. It was not the type of peace that he would feel relaxed in, it was more like the dreaded calm before a raging storm. Due to his time in the New World, he experienced conflicts after conflicts, each worse than the other. Peace like this was almost unheard of. I keep forgetting that this is paradise, Luffy thought to himself as he stood up from his throne and shook his head. He figured that he was just being paranoid and decided to go to his quarters and rest down for a bit. As he was about to turn the doorknob to open the door, Usopp screamed out for him from the crow's nest. "Captain!" Usopp screamed out, getting everyone's attention. A fleet of ships incoming straight ahead. He shouted while pointing to the front of the ship, causing everyone to look in the direction towards which they were currently sailing. As everyone looked ahead of them, they could barely see the silhouettes of a fleet of ships sailing towards them. "Is it the Marines?" Nami asked as she walked up to the front of the ship where Zoro was. Zoro pulled out a small handheld telescope and spied through it. "It's pirate ships," Zoro replied, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. Luffy turned his body into lightning and appeared beside Zoro. "It's no pirate ship I've ever seen before," Usopp said, spying through his telescope from up in the crow's nest. By now the rest of the crew had joined Zoro, Nami, and Luffy at the front of the ship. "That Jolly Roger," Zoro suddenly said with a slight panic look on his face. "I recognized it from my bounty hunting days," he said, causing everyone to look at him while Luffy narrowed his eyes further. "The last time you recognized as Jolly Roger was back in Alabasta," Luffy said lowly. And that was the Jolly Roger of the Whitebeard pirates, he said before turning to his vice-captain. Is it another one of the four emperors? He asked. No, but close enough, Zoro replied ominously. It is the Crimson Dawn pirates, he said grimly, causing Luffy's eyes to widen slightly as he stared out at the incoming fleet. Why does that name sound similar? Nojiko asked herself. She asked the question that a lot of the crew were thinking to themselves. It was the name of a pirate crew that most of them were sure they heard before, but they cannot seem to remember where or why. It sounds familiar because of a certain incident that took place a couple of years ago that made world news, Luffy said as recalled the event. The Crimson Dawn pirates are led by a man who used to be one of the most infamous pirates here on the Grand Line up until 3 years ago, Luffy elaborated as he stared at the approaching ships. His name is Leon Holton, or better known as the Crimson Breaker, he said, causing a few of his crew to remember why the name was so famous. I've heard of him, Sanji said as he lit a cigarette. They say everything he touches just destroyed, he added, causing Luffy to nod in acknowledgement. Leon is famous for many things, but there are two in particular that are probably the most notable, Luffy said as he began to explain again. The first being the fact that he is a prince from a rather large kingdom in the South Blue, he said, surprising his crew. Wanting the life of adventure, the youngest son of the king of the Blue Sky Kingdom set out to sea to become a pirate, Luffy said with a chuckle. Somewhere along his journey he ate a devil and gained the powers of the break fruit, allowing him to shatter anything he touches, he said, causing his crew's eyes to widen slightly. With his new devil fruit, he stormed through the Grand Line and into the New World, gathering a bounty of 600 million, a fleet of 25 ships with over 1,000 pirates under him, Luffy said, scaring his crew slightly. That sounds scary, Nami said with slight fear in her voice. As a prince, he was spoiled and arrogant, Luffy said with contempt in his voice, ignoring his slightly scared crew. Him gaining that devil fruit and a little bit of power made him even more arrogant, which is a direct cause for the thing that he is probably most famous for, he said as he watches the ships get a bit closer. 3 years ago, his arrogance led him to believe that he had the power to do the unthinkable and challenge one of the four emperors, more specifically Big Mom, Luffy added, lowly, earning a few gasps from his crew. I remember that, Usopp said from up in the crow's nest. It was in the papers for about a week, he added, causing everyone to recall why the name sounded so familiar. A lot of people were nervous leading up to the clash, especially the Navy, Luffy continued. They believed he actually stood a chance because he had the numbers on his side, but then reality set in, he said grimly. Of the 25 ships that made up the armada that was the Crimson Dawn pirates, only 6 managed to escape along with the flagship, Luffy said grimly. More than 800 pirates perished at the hands of Big Mom and her children, he said, causing his crew's eyes to widen in horror. I had heard that Leon fled the New World in fear of Big Mom but never actually believed it, but it seems that it was true, Luffy said as he walked forward, jumped up onto the sheep figurehead of the Going Merry and stared out at the incoming fleet. So, is he coming here as friend or foe? Zoro asked as he stared at the Jolly Roger sewn onto his captain's coat. Don't know, but the one thing I do know is that the Going Merry won't survive a fight with these guys, Luffy said, causing Usopp's eyes to widen. She is barely holding on as it is, he added, causing everyone to look around at the ship that carried them on their journey so far. Nami, Robin, you two go below deck and man the cannons. Luffy ordered, snapping the 2 girls out of their staring. Aye. They replied before rushing below deck. Chopper, man the rudder, Luffy yelled out. You got it, Luffy. Chopper said as he transformed into his human form and rushed into the rudder room. Usopp, Luffy called out as he turned and looked up at the crow's nest. You use your slingshot and pick them off from up there, Luffy ordered. We're going to fight these guys? Usopp asked in a slightly worried voice. You just said Merry won't survive, he argued, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him. Then I'll just have to destroy them before they can attack, Luffy said before looking up in the sky as thunder clouds began to gather, far thicker than anyone had ever seen. Nojiko, you take the rear, Luffy said, causing her to nod and take out her 3-section staff before walking over to the rear of the ship. Zoro port, Sanji starboard, he added, causing the two of them to nod and head down to the main deck, leaving him standing in the front alone as increasingly the clouds gather overhead. If someone were far away looking at the Going Merry approaching, it would look as though the ship was dragging a world-ending storm behind it. Luffy stood on the figurehead of the Going Merry with his golden staff in his hand, staring at the approaching fleet of pirate ships as his coat bellowed in the wind. A silence fell over the ship as they sailed closer and closer towards the incoming conflict. The silence was interrupted by the defending sounds of thunder and lightning striking the waters around the ship. After about 30 minutes of sailing, Luffy turned to Zoro and Sanji and gave out an order. "Raise the sails," Luffy ordered, causing the two of them to spring into action. Each of them grabbed a rope from either side of the mainmast and began pulling. After the sails were all the way up and no longer catching the wind, the ship began slowing down drastically until it almost stopped completely. Even though the ship was almost to a complete stop, neither Zoro nor Sanji released the ropes that were holding the sails up, because they knew that at a moment's notice their captain could give the order to release the sails and they would need to act fast. Even though the ship had stopped on the water, the thunderclouds overhead did not stop with it. They continued encompassing the skies over the incoming fleet as well. After stopping, Luffy and the crew could all get a better look at what they were about to face. 12 ships all sailing in a V formation, each bearing a different Jolly Roger with only one similar element on each flag, a crimson-red half-sun. At the very center of the formation leading the fleet of ships was the flagship bearing the Jolly Roger that Luffy had only ever seen in the newspapers. It was a skull with a lot of cracks in it, with two sabers replacing the usual crossbones. Behind the skull and sabers was a crimson-red half-sun taking up the background. Luffy smirked to himself as he saw the fleet come to a stop about 100 feet away from them. By now the thunderclouds in the sky had flooded every square inch of the sky for a 5-mile radius in all directions surrounding the Going Merry. "The Thunder Demon! Ha 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 ha!" a man shouted from the flagship of the fleet of ships. "What a lucky coincidence this is," he added before stepping forward and standing on the figurehead of his ship like Luffy. "Leon Holton," Luffy said in a calm voice. "I thought you gave up being a pirate," he added as he examined the man. Leon was a bit taller than Luffy. He had mahogany brown hair that framed his face. He was wearing a white silk shirt only buttoned up halfway, exposing a large scar on his chest, along with a pair of crimson pants and a saber strapped to the right side of his hip. Draped around his shoulders was a crimson-red cape connected by 3 golden chains. "I would rather die than leave this life," Leon replied with a wide smile. "It is nice to see you are still as powerful as I remembered," he said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow in confusion. "You make it sound as though you are familiar with my power," Luffy said as he stared at Leon. "You could say that," Leon replied with a smirk, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. "You could say I am a fan of yours," he added, causing Luffy to look at him with a bewildered expression on his face. "Ever I saw the impact you had on that incident 4 years ago, I couldn't help but admire you," he said, creeping Luffy out. "It was after witnessing that incident that I decided to go after Big Mom," he said in an angry voice as he clenched his fist. "Don't go blaming me for you leading your people to their deaths," Luffy said as he narrowed his eyes. "I'm not," Leon replied while shaking his head. "It was my own fault. I had underestimated the power of one of the 4 emperors," he said with a sigh. "What do you want, Leon?" Luffy asked as his patience was running thin. Hearing the question, Leon smirked and looked at Luffy with an excited look on his face. "I want to join you," he said before releasing a wave of Conqueror's Haki towards Luffy and his crew. Already noticing Leon's attack, Luffy released a bit of his own Haki to intercept Leon's before it reached his ship and crew. The 2 Haki clashed in the middle of the 2 ships, causing the sea in between them to become rough. "Ha ha ha ha. Yes. Only someone this powerful can I serve under," Leon yelled out with a large grin on his face. "Do not kid yourself, boy," Luffy said calmly as he narrowed his eyes. "This is not power that you can comprehend," he said, raising his voice slightly as he released a bit more of his Haki, causing it to overpower Leon's and was over all 12 of Leon's ships. Aboard the 12 ships, crew members began to pass out while foaming at the mouth. As Luffy Haki came in contact with a few of the ships, they started to crack under the pressure while some of the masts completely broke apart, unable to withstand the pressure. Amazing. Leon said in a weak voice as he fell to his knees while breathing heavily under the pressure. What use would I have for someone who can't even stay on their feet? Luffy asked rhetorically as he stared at Leon. I'm not weak. Leon screamed as he shakingly stood to his feet. While he struggled to get to his feet, he released a lot more of his haki, trying to push Luffy's back. He managed to push Luffy's haki back just enough to clear his ship, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at him, but a small smirk appeared on Luffy's face. That may be true, but compared to me, Luffy began before increasing his haki's strength a bit more, completely crushing Leon's resurgence. You are an ant, he said, causing the captain of Crimson Dawn Pirates to fall back to his knees and even more ships to break under the pressure. Leon gritted his teeth as he looked up from his position at Luffy. He then turned and looked around at his fleet, only to see the majority of his people were unconscious, while those who were still conscious were all in a similar position to him. He hated the position he was in now. It reminded him of the defeat he suffered at the hands of Big Mom. Please. Leon begged out under the pressure of Luffy's haki. You are the only hope I have to avenge my crew. He begged, causing Luffy to look at him with nothing but pity on his face. Come on, Captain, Zoro said from behind Luffy, causing him to turn and look at his first mate. He may be a good addition, he suggested, causing Luffy to contemplate on how he should proceed. He stopped his conqueror's haki, releasing the pressure from Leon and his fleet before smirking in their direction. Very well, Luffy said loudly to the captain and the few of his men who were still conscious. I'll give you a shot, he added, causing a grateful look to appear on Leon's face as he slowly got up to his feet. But you have to first pass a little test of mine, Luffy said with a smirk, causing the grateful on Leon's face to be replaced with a scared one. If you and your crew survive, you can join me, he said grimly. If not, then I guess you die, he added with a chuckle as he turned and walked back to the main deck where Zoro and Sanji were. As Luffy walked around, a feeling of absolute dread crept into the hearts of Leon and his crew. Looking around at his fleet, he could not help but feel that he was at disadvantage with the majority of his crew being unconscious. A lot of the men here with him right now were the last surviving members of his once grand fleet. Can I really ask to face death all over again? He questioned in his mind. He was the one who wanted revenge, he was the one who wanted to kill Big Mom to avenge his fallen crew. Was it right for him to drag these men down with him once more? The doubt kept creeping into his mind the more he thought about it. Let's do this, Captain, came the confident female voice from behind Leon, knocking him out of his thought. Looking over, he saw his first mate standing with his crew, all looking at him with nothing but confidence all over their faces. Yeah, Captain, another member of his crew shouted. Let's give 'em hell, they added, causing a smile to creep onto Leon's face. You guys, he said while shaking his head with a smile on his face before turning to the Going Merry and shouting. Bring it on, demon, he yelled with nothing but conviction in his voice. Hearing the conviction in the voice, Leon smirked to himself as he stood in front of Sanji and Zoro while the rest of his crew who were below deck made their way up to the main deck. Drop anchor, he said, puzzling his crew. Captain, Zoro asked with a confused look on his face. Just do it, Luffy said with a smirk. I feel like cutting loose a bit, he said with a chuckle before looking up at the thundercloud-infested sky. Nodding his head, Zoro went and dropped the anchor into the water. While he was doing that, Luffy tuned his body into lightning and teleported up the crow's nest and waited a few minutes. He wanted the unconscious members of Leon's fleet to wake up, that way they were at full strength. Allow me to show you your place in this world, boy, he thought to himself as he stared at the fleet. He waited 5 minutes before he spoke to Leon once more. Are you ready? He asked in a monotone voice. Bring it on, your power does not scare me, he shouted confidently, even though on the inside he was slightly worried. What a foolish man you are, Luffy said as he covered his palm in lightning and raised his hand in the air with his index and middle finger pointing to the sky. This is not a power of your understanding, he yelled just as a continuous stream of lightning shot out from his fingers and traveled up towards the thunderclouds in the sky. As the stream entered the clouds, Luffy cut it off from his end. As the tail of the stream of lightning disappeared into the thundercloud, a loud booming thunder shook the entire area, which was followed by a visible wave of lightning that rippled through the sky in all directions from the center where the stream ended. The thunderclouds had covered every inch of the sky within a 5-mile radius of the Going Merry. The ripples of lighting traveled to the far ends of the clouds until they disappeared from the view of everyone there. A resounding silence filled the area as everyone looked around. Everyone except Luffy and Leon, who were staring at each other. Leon had a terrified expression on his face as though he knew exactly what was about to happen. "You can't," he began before trailing off as Luffy held up his right palm still covered in lightning. He brought his thumb towards the middle finger as if he is getting ready to snap his fingers. "Thunder Palace," Luffy said before snapping his fingers. As his fingers snapped, numerous pillars of lightning fell from the sky, crashed down into the ocean, and remained in place. Each pillar was about 10 feet wide, and all were randomly scattered about. Everyone looked around in sheer awe at what was before them. Pillars fell from the heavens everywhere within that very same 5-mile radius around the Going Merry. No one could see where the end of all these pillars or lightning was, all they could do was gape in shock. What kind of power is this?" Sanji asked as the cigarette fell from his mouth. "I thought I had seen the full extent of his power," Zoro said as he looked around in amazement. "But this is on a whole other level," he added. "You can't be serious." Leon shuddered from his ship as he looked around. This is," he began with a sense of familiarity in his voice. "It is even more spectacular now than it was 4 years ago," his first mate said as she looks around at the countless pillars of lightning that seems as though they were holding the heavens themselves up. "We are all dead," Leon said grimily. He had seen this technique of Luffy's once before 4 years ago. It had left not one person alive. "Relax, I am not going to do what you think I am going to do," came the voice of Luffy echoing across the area. "I did say I was going to give you a fighting chance, didn't I?" He asked rhetorically before snapping his fingers once more, and all the pillars of lightning vanished, leaving countless holes in the ocean. Water then began rushing into each of the holes, creating multiple whirlpools in the process, which pulled each of Leon's ships in a different direction. "Ah!" The pirates in Leon's fleet screamed as their ship jerked around at the mercy of the sea. "Someone do something, please," another begged. "Man the rudder," the captains of each of the ships commanded. "We will not die here," one captain proclaimed. Luffy and his crew simply looked on as the ships were being pulled and tossed around by the whirlpools. The Going Merry was not really affected due to it being anchored in place thanks to them dropping the anchor, and none of the whirlpools was in close proximity to the ship. Luffy hopped down to the main deck where all of his crew were standing staring around them in awe. "I would have figured you guys would have gotten used to this stuff by now," he commented nonchalantly. "I think it is impossible for someone to get used to seeing the stuff you do, Captain," Robin said while everyone else nodded in agreement. "Are you sure it is a good idea to let him join us?" Nami asked in a suspicious tone. "It shouldn't be a problem," Luffy said as he turned and looked out at Leon's flagship spinning around in the ocean. "If he really does know who I am, he won't be stupid enough to try something," he added. "Isn't this too easy of a test though?" Sanji asked. "I am starting to get the feeling that it is," Luffy said as he saw all of Leon's ships were still upright and still afloat. "Maybe I should have used that technique the way it was supposed to be used," he whispered under his breath, but his crew heard him. "How was it supposed to be used?" Usopp asked as he tilted his head to the side. Luffy just smirked and chuckled to himself before he responded. "Let's just say all of them would have been dead already had I not cancelled it when I did," he said with a chuckle, causing everyone to raise an eyebrow at their captain. "So, what now?" Nojiko asked as she folded her arms. "Now we just wait for everything to calm down," Luffy said as his throne appeared behind him and he sat down. "We don't have to worry about them attacking us. They are too busy at the moment," he said as he looked around the ocean where Leon's fleet had been scattered by his whirlpools. 2 hours later. It had taken 2 hours for the sea to come back down and the whirlpools to disappear along with the thunderclouds in the sky. The sun had set, and the stars were shining in the sky. Luffy was standing on the main deck looking around as the fleet of ships that had been scattered by his whirlpools were all sailing back towards the Going Merry. When all the ships reached the Going Merry, they all surrounded the Straw Hats. Luffy then stepped forward in the direction of Leon's ship with Zoro to his right slightly behind him. "You seem to have found some capable people to sail with you," Luffy complimented as he walked forward. "Thank you," Leon said with a tired smile on his face. "I wouldn't be alive without them," he added, earning smiles from his crew and his fleet. "Come aboard and let's get this over with," Luffy then ordered as he stepped back and motioned the pirate captain to come on board the Merry. Leon looked behind him and gave a slight nod to someone before the two of them leapt off of their ship and onto the Going Merry. When they landed on board the Merry, Luffy got a good look at the person beside Leon. It was a woman who Luffy knew to be the first mate of the Crimson Dawn pirates. She was blonde, curly hair tied in a ponytail revealing a chiseled, radiant face. Clear blue eyes, set dreadfully within their sockets, watch warmly over the crews they have grieved with for so long. Scars reaching from just under the left eyebrow, running towards her upper lip, and ending on her left nostril and leaving a fascinating memory of defeat at the hands of Big Mom. The is the face of the Red Fist, Emily Masser, the first mate of the Crimson Dawn pirates. She stands alluringly among others, despite her athletic frame. Something is puzzling about her. Perhaps it is her sense of freedom, or perhaps it's simply her good looks. "Who might you be, beautiful lady?" asked Sanji as he rushed forward and kissed the back of Emily's hand, surprising her. Luffy sighed and shook his head before he spoke. "Nami," was all he said before his navigator appeared behind Sanji and dragged him away by the ear. "Damn perverted cook," Zoro mumbled under his breath. Luffy then turned his attention back to the duo and spoke. "Let's get this over with," Luffy said as he turned and moved towards his throne and sat down. Leon then sat down on the deck in front of Luffy while Emily remained standing behind her captain. Luffy then turned and looked to Zoro and Sanji and gave a slight nod to the two of them. The duo walked into the kitchen for a few minutes before walking back out with Zoro carrying a large red sake cup in his right hand and a smaller one in the left while Sanji was carrying a barrel of alcohol. Zoro placed the large sake cup down in between the two captains but closer to Luffy while he placed a smaller one in front of Leon. Sanji then placed the barrel of alcohol off the side of the two captains. Leon then nodded his head, walked over the barrel, and opened it. When he saw what was inside, he turned and looked at Luffy with a slightly confused expression on his face. "Whiskey?" he asked in a confused tone. "Yeah, I hate sake," Luffy replied, causing Leon to nod. The captain of the Crimson Dawn pirates then lifted the barrel and poured whiskey into Luffy's cup, filling it to the brim. He then carefully poured some whiskey into his sake cup before placing the barrel back down and returning to his seated position in front of Luffy. "Please allow me to make an oath," Leon said as he led up his cup with both hands. Luffy nodded before reaching down and grabbing the large cup with one hand and holding it in front of him, waiting for Leon to take the oath. "From this day forward, I, Leon Holton, captain of the Crimson Dawn pirates, hereby pledge my loyalty to the Thunder Demon, Monkey D. Luffy. Together with my crew and my fleet, we shall be his shield and his sword in all weather however he commands us. I drink from the sun's cup of my own volition, devoting my life and soul to you," Leon said with conviction before bringing the cup up to his lips and drinking the whiskey. Luffy smiled slightly and brought the large cup up to his lips as well. "I accept your oath," Luffy said before drinking all of the whiskey in the large cup. After finishing their drink, both of them placed their cups down on the deck and gave a small smile towards each other. Before either of them could say anything, the pirates who were a part of Leon's fleet burst into cheers. "They seem happy," Nami commented as they all looked around. "Luffy is so cool," Chopper said with stars in his eyes as he stared up at Luffy, causing him to smile and chuckle at the little reindeer. "Normally, this is where we would have a banquet to celebrate this new alliance," Luffy said as he stood up from his throne and stretched his hand out to pull Leon up from his sitting position on the floor. "But I am in a bit of a rush to get to Water 7, he said as he pulled Leon up from the floor. "I understand," Leon said with a smile as he stood up. "How long have you been in paradise?" Luffy asked while starting at his new subordinate. Since my fight with Big Mom, Leon replied in a pained voice as he clenched his fist. Ever heard of an island named Jaya? Luffy asked, causing Leon to raise an eyebrow at him before he responded. Yeah, I've heard of it, Leon responded. We frequented Mock Town quite a few times. If I am not wrong, I do believe we have an eternal pose for that island, he added before looking back at his first mate for her confirmation. Emily looked at her captain and nodded her head, confirming that they do indeed have an eternal pose for the island. Wonderful, Luffy said with a smile. Make your way there and look for a man named Daz Bones. I will let him know you are coming, he said, causing Leon and Emily to raise an eyebrow. He will point you in the direction of where you can find a woman named Paula who along with yourself will be in charge of all of my operations here in Paradise, Luffy said, confusing the pirate captain and his first mate even more. Your operations? Leon asked in a confused tone. Paula will explain all that to you, he replied while waving his hand. I will also let her know to expect you and will give her permission to brief you on the operations here in Paradise and your role in everything, he added. What is going to be my role exactly? Leon asked with a skeptical look on his face. For the most part, you are going to be in charge of everything here in Paradise, Luffy said, surprising Leon. You and Isaac are my commanders or generals if you wish, he explained as he walked over to the side and looked out at the sea and a few ships. Isaac is in charge of everything in the West Blue and you will be in charge of everything here in Paradise, he said, causing Leon to nod his head understanding. Where do fall in the rankings? Emily asked as she spoke for the first time in a peaceful voice, getting everyone's attention. Leon and Isaac are equal in rank, Luffy said, earning a nod for the duo. And the members of my crew outrank all of you, he added, causing the duo to look around the ship at Luffy's crew. Isaac outranks your crew and your fleet and you outrank his crew and fleet, he said, causing Leon to nod. Isaac has a fleet? Leon asked in a surprised tone. I asked him to gather more pirates to sail under my flag, Luffy replied, earning a nod from Leon. I take it you are going to want me to do the same? Leon asked, causing Luffy to smile. Yes, I do, he replied with a smirk. Also, make sure to add a straw hat to your Jolly Roger and every Jolly Roger in your fleet, he ordered. You got it, Leon replied with a small salute. Now there are few islands here in Paradise under my protection, Luffy said in a serious tone. If you and your fleet show up to one of these islands and I hear that you and your people caused some kind of trouble on one of those islands, he said before trailing off. There will be some very dire consequences, he added coldly. You can rest assured, I will keep my people in order, Leon said, giving Luffy his guarantee. Well then, that's everything I think, Luffy said, feeling as though he told the captain everything he needed to. To Jaya then? Leon asked. To Jaya, Luffy responded with a nod. I will be in touch if anything comes up, he added, causing the man to nod his head before turning his head to his first mate. Let's go back, he said, causing Emily to nod her head, and to two of them waved the straw hats goodbye before leaping back onto their flagship. Set a course to Jaya. Leon shouted for his fleet to hear. Aye, Captain. His men responded before jumping into action. Soon all 12 ships began sailing away from Luffy and the crew, causing the straw hat wearing captain to let out a tired sigh and plopped himself down on his throne. Nami, resume our course to Water 7, said a tired Luffy, causing his navigator to smile and nod at him before she and Nojiko made their way to the rudder. Raise the anchor and release the sails. Nami yelled out as she and Nojiko walked towards the rudder, causing Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper to scramble. Hopefully, we get there without any further delay, Robin said with a smile, causing everyone to nod in agreement. The Going Merry then resumed its course to Water 7 while the 12 ships of the Crimson Dawn fleet were sailing away from them in the opposite direction.